Chapter 737. Why did people often say that he was senile? When people got older, their bodily functions would decline. Many times, they would have a different way of dealing with things than when they were young. Before Duque traveled to this world, there was a psychological study. If a person did not try something that he thought was terrible before the age of 30, there was a 90% chance that he would not try it again after the age of 30. For example, bungee jumping. The Antonidas who appeared in front of Duque looked even older. Wrinkles crawled up every corner of his face. Although his eyes were still lively, the twinkle in his eyes told everyone that he was suspicious. You people from Lordaeron are only here now. Are you waiting for the Dalajan to kneel before you come to reap the rewards? You, Duque, did not come earlier or later. Arthas killed his father here, and you're already here? Seeing Antonida's gaze, Duque's heart skipped a beat. There were not many decades in one's life. 10 years might pass in a flash in the eyes of young people, but in the eyes of old people, it was extremely long. On the way here, it was not that Duque did not hear from Elugia about the filthy affairs of Lordaeron. In the past 10 years, the kingdom of Lordaeron had annexed the old territory of Alterac in order to expand their territory. In order to support his son, Terina stripped Uther of his title indiscriminately because Uther opposed Arthas' slaughter of the orphanage. The Dalajan had begun to play closed door, refusing to export mages to other countries. King Garen of Stormguard was acting recklessly. Gilnis had closed the country. 10 years of open and secret strife was enough to wear away the camaraderie that had accumulated in the alliance against the Horde. The only fortunate thing was that the reconstruction and development of the kingdom of Stormwind and Cosmodan in the southern continent was quite good. At least the military framework of the alliance had been preserved. In the face of Antonida's rebuke, Duke was neither humble nor pushy. Karazhan is surrounded by countless spatial rifts in the void. It was not easy for me to find a gap, and I just rushed back. Mograine quickly tried to smooth things over. Lord Antonidas, now is not the time to blame anyone. We can slowly figure out who is at fault for this disaster later. Don't you think that the first thing we need to deal with is the King of the Dead who claims to want to turn the entire continent into Lordaeron's territory? Both Duque and Antonida's eyelids twitched. This wasn't the nearly immortal life of the elves, but the taboo of the walking of the dead. Let a group of ghost-like monsters kill all the living and rule the world? Other than those cursing sect cultists who had lost their minds for immortality, who else would do such a thing? In the face of the larger conflict of life and death, the dirty matters between countries could only be regarded as small conflicts. Like pebbles on the roadside, they could only be thrown aside. Antonidas narrowed his eyes, wrinkles appearing at the corners of his eyes. He pursed his lips. Are we going to join forces with those green-skinned monsters? Apart from the pitiful youths who hadn't experienced the first or second battle of the Dark Portal, no one in the Alliance would have a good impression of the Beastmen. Cooperate? If we can't defeat Arthas, that scum who killed his own father, then I will consider it. Antonidas was about to say something, but Duque's next words made him lose his temper. At least the Beastmen are living people, aren't they? Do you want to see the Beastmen get killed by the Scourge and turn into stronger zombies to attack the Dalajan? Everyone smiled bitterly. The undead calamity hadn't been around for long. As the frontline commanders, they had figured out the pattern. Those who were strong in life would be strong after death. If the zombies that the civilians turned into after death were trash, then the Beastmen zombies had at least 50 combat power. If Arthas slaughtered all the Beastmen now, it would be bad. The leaders of the Alliance looked at each other and immediately came to a consensus. Just as the bugler was about to blow the horn, Duque said, "After that, use this horn and blow this." Duque magically took out a giant horn that was obviously Beastman style. Woo woo woo. At first, the Alliance had no problem with it. However, the Alliance immediately realized that something was wrong. This seemed to be the Beastman's horn. Everyone looked at the bugler on the hill who was blowing the giant Beastman horn. They really didn't know what the Alliance leaders were doing. Stop looking. The commander of this battle is Duke Marcus. Do you think you can understand Lord Marcus's plan? The middle-level commanders scolded the soldiers below. On the central battlefield, a few kilometers away, the four Horde heroes were engaged in a fierce battle with Arthas. Thrall, Rexer, Grom, and Orgrim. These four Horde heroes were definitely fierce people who could fight against 1,000 men. The four of them ganged up on Arthas. They thought that they could take him down no matter what. The Death Knights first appeared in the Horde. As a monster created by Dan, Orgrim was still a little wary. He knew about the skills of the Death Knights. However, as the most powerful Death Knight under the command of Lich King Nizul, Arthas with Frostmourne was far more powerful than Orgrim had imagined. Corpse manipulation made the surrounding Beastman warriors attack the four Horde heroes instead. Evil Aura increased the movement speed and attack speed of nearby undead allies. The most disgusting was Death Coil. Many times, Arthas' armor had already been smashed, and even his body had been injured. With an extreme Death Coil, a besieging Beastman would immediately fall. At first, Orgrim thought that these were just spells. He even had a few newly trained shamans try to interrupt Arthas with all kinds of shock. Later, he sadly found out that it was a suicide mission. On the battlefield full of corpses and the living, Arthas was simply invincible. Of course, the most terrifying thing was the Frostmourne that emitted a strange and terrifying aura. Orgrim saw with his own eyes that a shaman who was killed by this magic sword turned into a zombie. Even his soul was sucked into this evil rune magic sword, unable to reincarnate. At first, Orgrim and Grom could suppress Arthas with their superb martial arts. Who knew that this former prince of Lordaeron was also a true martial arts genius? After a dozen rounds, they were evenly matched with Orgrim and Grom. After 50 rounds, if it wasn't for Thrall's sudden attacks and Rexer's occasional battle pets to block Arthas' killer moves, at least one of Grom or Orgrim would have been defeated. This can't go on. Just when the four Horde heroes were in a difficult situation, they suddenly heard a strange horn sound that belonged to the Horde. Chapter 738. The horn of the Horde was very special. Of course, ordinary humans wouldn't be able to remember the cadence and rise and fall of the horn. Duque had never been an ordinary person. As long as they systematically intercepted the name of the Horde and compared it with the actions of the Horde, it would be easy to analyze it. After all, the grammar of the Orc language wasn't too different from the grammar of the common language. Generally speaking, it was still a subject, predicate, object structure. Once they understood this, they would understand. The horn that came from the human alliance translated into Orc language. We will attack the enemy from the north, please cooperate. No, this isn't our horn. Orgrim was the first to realize. Whose? Before Thrall could ask, a trumpeter nearby already asked, which tribe are you from? The other side was silent for a few seconds before the sound of a bugle horn was heard. Then, Orgrim's side was silent for a few seconds. For a moment, Orgrim almost wanted to turn around and run at all costs. Wasn't this a trap? Thrall was stunned for a moment and almost got hit by Arthas. He rolled on the ground awkwardly to avoid Frostmourne's horizontal slash. It wasn't just the four Horde heroes, the entire Orc army was in an uproar. It was a note that hadn't been played by a trumpeter for more than 10 years. This note only meant one thing. It was a name that was almost forgotten. No old Orc wanted to mention it, but they had to remember it, Duke Marcus. The general meaning of the horn was, I'm Duque. Do you need help? If not, I'll leave. On the Horde side, those who only had muscles left in their heads and were always saying, don't be a coward, just do it. Their graves were already 3 feet high. Those who could survive more than 10 years of hiding were not idiots. Not to mention these big Orc bosses. Orgrim and Rexer were captured in the Battle of Scorching Canyon, and it took them many years to escape. Grom was chased by the Windrunner sisters in Tirisful Glades for many years. At first, it was the eldest and second sisters, and then Sylvanas chased him for a long time. Although Sal had changed places, he had been a slave gladiator for a long time. The unusual movements of the human army, the heavy weapons that were left behind in the military camp, the sudden attack of the Calamity Army, the ridiculously powerful leader of the Death Knights, and finally Duque, who had revealed his identity. If they still didn't know that this was all Duke's plan, then Orgrim and the others would have wasted their lives. It's that demon Duke? Grom used Blood Howl to block Arthes's attack head-on as he cursed, "How dare he say that he's joining forces with us? He's the only one who can be so shameless." Orgrim gritted his teeth as he gave Arthes another blow with his hammer. His mouth was filled with bitterness. "What do we do?" Sal shouted. "What to do? What else could he do?" Even if they knew that it was Duke, that bastard, who dug a hole for them, the whole tribe would still be in trouble. What else could they do? Could he still beg for mercy from that inhumane dead face? Arthes couldn't wait to turn them all into corpses. The tribe could have a backbone and not let Duke come over. Maybe the humans would find a way to deal with the additional hundreds of thousands of orc zombies, but so what? But if the humans didn't come over, the tribe would kneel. Now the tribe wanted to revive, not be destroyed here. Orgrim dodged and used a dying beastman as a shield to block Arthas' death's coil. "Thrall, do you understand? As a leader, there are many times when your decisions are accompanied by pain." Pain? Ever since he was young, he had regarded Duke as his enemy and Duke as his imaginary enemy. Finally, this legendary, possibly dead great devil had appeared in front of him. Who would have thought that in their first meeting, they would fall into Duke's trap and have to beg Duke to save them? The feeling of being fooled and crushed by Duke in terms of intelligence filled every cell in Sal's body. However, Thrall was determined and wise. He exchanged glances with Orgrim and quickly made a decision. 5 kilometers to the north, the Scarlet Cross army had regrouped after a battle that was not too intense. Although they weren't completely unscathed, it was definitely a rare victory. More than 200,000 zombies, tens of thousands of ghouls, and thousands of cave demons and gargoyles had been destroyed. The Dalajan infantry regiment was organizing to clear out the remaining enemies and carefully collect the corpses, preparing to burn them all. Duke had said that even if the corpses were disassembled, the Scourge could still use the bones to create more terrifying undead creatures. Duke's description of the Scourge army had easily frightened a few members of the Kirin Tor Parliament. Duke secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it wasn't the Scourge yet. The Abomination, a monster made from a large number of corpses and a mountain of flesh, had yet to be born. Similarly, the evil Dark Liches hadn't developed the blood and bone puppets, which were a mixture of flesh and bones. It seemed that Arthas hadn't gotten the Ice Dragon army either. The Scourge now was far weaker than it had been in history. Well, it should be the same for Arthas. The original Arthas had experienced the massacre of the holy city of Stratholme, and the mental blow he had suffered was far greater than the burning of an orphanage. After all, it was a competition between him and the Dreadlord to see who could burn the infected residents faster but hadn't completely turned into zombies. The torture of conscience like a death match was definitely much greater than burning a group of orphans. It was true that he was now the most powerful Death Knight, but the human nature left in his soul made his dark powers far weaker than he had been at the same time in history. This was what Duke could make use of. As long as the Horde's fierce warriors were the vanguard, Duke had a 50% chance of making Arthas kneel here. After the horn sounded, Mograine was a little nervous and a little perturbed. Will the Horde agree? It wasn't just the Horde that couldn't change their minds. The alliance was almost the same. Suddenly hearing that they wanted to ally with the Horde? If the one who made this proposal wasn't the legendary hero and the current commander of the alliance, Duke, the generals below would have already made a fuss. If anyone has the confidence to defeat an undead army led by a death demigod with just the strength of humans, I'll give him the position of commander. Duke's one sentence suppressed everyone's different opinions. At this moment, Duke's lips curled into a confident smile. The Horde will agree. Chapter 739. As soon as Duke finished speaking, a clear and sunny voice interrupted. If that's the case, count me in for the surprise attack later. Duke was dumbfounded. Your Highness Kael'thas? It was the handsome high elf Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider. If he had not come, Duque would have almost forgotten that ever since he led the army to surround Kuel Salis and failed, Prince Chaos, whose reputation had plummeted, was once again sent to the Dalajan by his father and the Silver Moon Council to further his studies. Yes, it was indeed to study exile. Sometimes, Duque could not help but wonder if he was too dazzling and had instead caused trouble for Chaos. However, who could be blamed for that battle back then? If Chaos had really been possessed by the god of war and defeated the horde, then Duque would not have been able to retreat thousands of soldiers with one flag. Looking at Chaos' sincere face, Duke suddenly had the urge to help this bitter prince no matter what in the future if he had the chance. Arthas, who has Frostmourne, is likely to have demigod-level strength, even though he has not fully unleashed it yet. As Duque said this, the smile on Chaos' face became gentler. If you're not afraid, what should I be afraid of? Your Highness, you. It was very rare for Duque to see something called courage on Chaos' face. We all have the same life. I don't think I'm any different from you. As a Kirin Tor counselor, there's nothing wrong with risking my life to protect the city I work for, right? No. Kaizi, you've heard of me. We're really different. I can run back to the corpse and resurrect. Since 15 years ago, you've bravely defended this world time and time again. 15 years have passed, but I've accomplished nothing. I'm beginning to realize that it's my inner cowardice that's restricting my progress. No. Kaizi, when you realize that death will only lose your moral integrity, you won't be afraid of death. Today, I think I should take this step. Alright, take a step. Don't blame me if you pull your balls. Duque no longer had any anger towards Kale, who had transformed into Xuanzang's chanting state. At this moment, a series of high-pitched and low-pitched bugles came from the distant battlefield. As expected of a tribe. Duque smiled. What did the green dwarf say? Antonidas asked. Duque pursed his lips and translated, we can work together this time. After that, we'll still be enemies. Several big shots of the alliance snorted coldly. Their faces were filled with a strange expression that said, Beastmen are so unreasonable. Duque didn't dare to speak. At the end of the day, he was the one who had dug the pit for the orcs to jump into. Although the alliance and the horde had been enemies for generations, the orcs had indeed reached their limit as they wanted to cooperate with each other. Duque was also worried. He had been given such a bad hand as soon as he returned. If he had the elites of the watchtower, would he still need to make use of the orcs? First, the orcs were overturned, and then Arthas' doomsday army was flattened. The most troublesome thing was that the best holy knights weren't by his side. What could Duque do? We can act later, Antonidas said in a low voice. Duque glanced at the Breaking Dawn mage and sighed in his heart. Old man Antonidas is old, stubborn, and corrupted. If they acted later, they could weaken the orcs, but in a sense, they would also be watching the orcs and the Doomsday army fight to the death. However, this was too short-sighted. At this point in time before Archimonde, the big shot of the Burning Legion, arrived. Arthas, as the strongest Death Knight, was the biggest threat. To a certain extent, the Alliance would benefit from an internecine outcome. It would be very difficult to trick the Horde into joining them. Duque didn't know if he could stop Archimonde's arrival. If he failed, it would obviously affect the upcoming battle of Mount Hyjal. That would be the first time the Alliance, the Horde, and the Night Elves worked together. So after hearing Antonidas' suggestion, Duque shook his head. No. Compared to the Horde, who has lost the courage to fight us, Arthas is the biggest threat. If we let the Horde go, it's just another battle. The Alliance will have an 80% chance of winning. However, if we let the Doomsday army go, the entire Rotterdam will not see a single living person for 3 months. Duque's description of the future was a little exaggerated. However, the snowballing ability of the Doomsday army to turn people into zombies was undoubtedly very shocking. Antonidas was silent. Woo woo woo, the Alliance's marching horn sounded. This time, there were no reckless cavalry charges. Instead, the heavy infantry with big shields was in front, the spear team was in the third row, the javelin team and the archer team were in the middle, and the cavalry was in the 2 wings. It was a standard Rotterdam army formation. At the back were the Dalajan mages and their guards. The infantry and cavalry trotted all the way in a perfect and oppressive formation, pushing straight towards the back of Arthas's doomsday army. Don't be afraid. Don't hesitate. The holy light shines on us. Those monsters are no longer our family. They're evil undead. Blow up their heads and chop off their claws. Don't stop until their heads are smashed into smashed watermelons. Even if these monsters bite you, they might turn you into monsters like them. The wounded should retreat immediately and request for the priest's holy light treatment. If there are no priests or paladins around, when you lose all feeling in your limbs, you have to break them immediately before the numbness spreads to your body. Otherwise, you'll become a damned living dead. Bring the holy water with you. It will save your life at the critical moment. The Alliance's lieutenants kept shouting, reminding the soldiers of various things to take note of. Those were originally the experiences that the Silver Dawn and the Scarlet Crusade had gained from decades of extremely tragic and cruel wars in history. They were distributed by Duque in advance. No one knew how Duque got those experiences. However, just like the veterans who had become officers, they believed in Duque unconditionally during the World War II at the Dark Portal. Now, they still firmly believed in him. It was different from the orcs' wild way of killing their enemies. The orcs killed 10,000 of their enemies and lost 3,000 of their own. Then, these 3,000 would turn into zombies to find trouble with their own people. The Alliance's destruction of the Doomsday Army could be said to be quite thorough. Most of the zombies and ghouls that pounced on them were first baptized by the mages, firewall spell, and then by the arrows and javelins before they could reach the front of the formation. When the sparse undead pounced on them, the third and fourth rows of spearmen would often accurately pierce the heads of these undead that were charging straight at them. If there were any that slipped through the net, a sword and shield soldier would first hold them off. Then, several spears would directly stab the zombies into specimens. Finally, the sword and shield soldier would use short swords to chop the zombies into parts. Chapter 740. At first, the orcs were very dissatisfied when they saw how slowly the humans were advancing. Even though the chiefs announced that the humans were temporary allies, the orcs still despised the humans. They felt that the humans were only doing their job. Soon, the orcs began to change their opinion. If the orcs' battle line was an unstable blender, with zombies often breaking through the defense line, then the humans' battle formation was the most terrifying shredder. Tens of thousands of scourge soldiers pounced on the humans' battle formation. It looked like a raging wave crashing onto the shore, but it was useless. The most threatening gargoyles were destroyed by Duque and several other archmages before they could even dive over. The gargoyles were directly smashed into stone pieces in midair and fell to the ground. The second biggest threat was the cave-dweller demons. These demons threw small poisonous spiders as long-range attacks, causing a lot of trouble for the Alliance army. But that was only the extent of trouble. The cave-dweller demons' huge bodies made them easy targets for the human archmages and archers. Usually, 8 to 10 fireballs would hit them, and even the strongest cave-dweller demons would be smashed into pieces. Arthas' army of the undead was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The entire huge black battle formation was smashed into pieces from the north and south. This is impossible. Through the soul connection, Arthas also sensed the decline of his army. He suddenly turned around and saw the imposing Scarlet Cross army. It was like the rising sun, driving away the darkness. That fiery red light almost dazzled his pale and handsome dead face. Ras Frostwhisper, hold the north side. Sensing the death of the Dark Dean, Ras Frostwhisper already knew that the Alliance army was not to be trifled with. Unfortunately, as the substitute of the Lich King, Arthas' status and will were absolute. Lich King Nizul, who had become a pure soul and was sealed in a block of ice, would certainly not allow Ras Frostwhisper to be a scapegoat for such a small matter. The Bitter Reese could only lead his warlock brothers and the low-level Lich to command a large number of low-level undead to go up against them. The Bendis. Duque pointed at Ras Frostwhisper. Even if Kale, that was a noble prince, since he had entered the Alliance's ranks, he was Duque's subordinate. With a flick of Duque's finger, Kale's, who had a few arcane fireballs hovering above his head, immediately flashed out to meet Ras Frostwhisper. As an immortal, he had an instinctive aversion to fire. Becoming a lich meant that he no longer had any fate with fire magic. Compared to Kale, who was like a miniature sun, Ras Frostwhisper represented endless winter. At first glance, Kale /S Flame Elemental Ball and Rice /S Frost Elemental Ball were like two paintings of completely different styles, forcibly piecing them together. Endless fire and frost elements from the elements realm were molded into the form of magic spells and bombarded towards the opponent constantly. For a time, it turned into a magic war. As one of the bosses of Scholomance, Ras Frostwhisper was quite strong. His Frost Arrow Rain was able to put Kale, who lacked actual combat experience, into a fluster. Seeing the way Kale, attacked, Duque only wanted to facepalm. Although they were both radiant moons, how could an unorthodox lich like Ras Frostwhisper compare to a proper elven prince? However, Kale, really did not have much experience in real magic battles, and in the end, it was the elven prince who was suppressed. Can't he use fire just because he's good at it? An arcane bomb will teach him a lesson. Duque muttered softly. Who knew that Kale, pair of elven long ears, would listen to Duque's side? The rich guy was actually enlightened. The former Earl of Reese raised his fleshless skeletal hands. Just as he was about to use a hand gesture to launch a new spell, an unexpected scene happened. It was a large fireball that exploded about 5 meters in front of him. Unexpectedly, after being offset by his frost arrow, the fireball exploded. Suddenly, a purplish-blue light flashed in the middle of the fireball, and an arcane bomb that contained an enormous amount of magic power suddenly accelerated. Then, it shot from lightning to less than 2 meters in front of Ras and exploded before it could touch his magic shield. A violent arcane impact surged over, and the lich was caught off guard. He withstood the damage of the arcane spell, but he was unable to offset the terrifying shockwave that exploded in all directions. The bitter Ras only saw a flash of purplish-blue arcane spell. The shockwave of the explosion first pressed a hemispherical depression into the translucent ice shield that covered his body. Then, his entire body was sent flying. Liches never lacked calm. However, the turbulence of the arcane explosion also interfered with his flash spell. As a result, he was smashed into the ground like a cannonball. The huge impact blasted a large crater in the battlefield full of flesh and bones. The surroundings were full of exploding flesh and blood, broken limbs and fragments scattered on the ground like the pitter-patter of rain. Ras was in a sorry state in this explosion. His gorgeous purplish-red mage robe was blown into rags, and even the bones of his fingers that withstood the impact showed signs of breaking. Before he could climb out of the deep pit, a huge golden shadow suddenly flashed out of the pit in front of him. The golden light, the white gold warhorse, and the holy power that was full of awe-inspiring righteousness. 1 man and 1 horse. But it had the terrifying momentum of thousands of soldiers and horses charging at the same time. Ras Frostwhisper, who had not yet figured out what happened, first felt his face heat up, and then he immediately felt the holy light contained in the holy light hammer and the destructive power it brought to his body. Ah! The lich had long lost his voice, but the trembling sound that came from his soul still echoed in all directions. His ugly skull, which no longer had any flesh, directly exploded under the full force of General Alfred Abendis' blow into countless tiny bone fragments that splattered in all directions. Lich Ras Frostwhisper. At the same time, 3 people joined the battle between the 4 tribal heroes and Arthas. Mograine Antonidas and Duke Marcus. Orgrim and Arthas said this name at the same time, which to them was a terrible name. Duque smiled and waved his hand. Yo, the weather is really nice today. Thrall looked at the dark sky covered by the canopy of undead and found that he could not understand Duque's thoughts. Duque stood with his hands behind his back, ignoring Arthas, who was looking at him with hatred, and walked up to Orgrim. You and I have no intention of forgetting the pain of the past. But for the future of our race, how about we work together for once? Orgrim was silent for a moment. All right, A small fist and a huge fist collided lightly. Chapter 741. If it was the first great chief, he would have chosen to deal with Duque first, and then see if he could deal with Arthas. In fact, the first batch of orcs who drank the demon's blood were mostly brainless fellows who thought that they should not be afraid, just fight. Time could wear down a person's mind. Orgrim was no longer the hot-blooded leader who thought that he could conquer the world just because he controlled the tribe. In addition, after more than 10 years, he had experienced glory, but he had also experienced hardships. He had been a great chieftain, but he had also been a prisoner. He had seen the splendor of civilization, and he had been a barbarian for almost 10 years. Orgrim had seen everything in the world. When the demon's blood gradually faded, the orcs were still brave, but they were no longer violent. Orgrim knew that in a sense, the orcs were also victims who had been deceived. However, this did not mean that they could erase the terrible history of destruction and slaughter in the world of Azeroth. Just like back then, in order to fight against the Alliance, he did not hesitate to bring Death Knights and Trolls into the tribe. In the face of the greater threat of the Scourge army, he led Sar to temporarily compromise with the Alliance. The only thing that Orgrim was glad about was that the person he reached this temporary agreement with was Duke Marcus, the enemy he hated the most in the past. The person he hated the most was also the person he understood the most. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that as long as the Alliance had a new general, Orgrim would definitely force Sar to retreat even if he had to sacrifice his life. But Orgrim did not know if Duque was still the same Duque from back then. If Duque was still the sensible Duque from back then, the tribe would not have suffered a loss this time. Of course, from the actions of first kicking the tribe into a pit and then rescuing them. Although he was unhappy that Duque was definitely the real Duque and not someone in disguise, on the other side, Arthas was shocked and angry when he first saw Duque. This was because Duque had repeatedly ruined his plans, or rather, the mission given to him by the Lich King. The destruction of 500,000 Undyings was a significant loss to the Scourge army. As soon as Duque appeared, Arthas was no longer in a hurry to attack. He stood with his sword and displayed Frostmourne, which emitted a cold and terrifying glow in front of everyone. This was Arthas's pride. He was once a prince, and he was now a king. Although he was the king of the kingdom of the dead. Oh Duque, how rare, I thought you were already dead. Arthas's face was filled with contempt and ridicule. Duque showed no mercy. I also thought you were dead. Why are you still talking like a living person? Arthas's expression stiffened. Hoo-hoo. Ha. Perhaps it was because Grom Hellscream had a low sense of humor, but seeing his old rival, Duque, ridiculing his new, more annoying opponent, Grom actually laughed out loud in the midst of the chaotic battlefield. Don't mind me, you guys continue. This time, Arthas's face darkened. You don't understand. Only death is eternal. Duque was disdainful. You're the one who doesn't understand. Didn't you see the Lich King, Nuzul, turn a stray dog on the roadside into a Death Knight like you? Only the most powerful living can become the most powerful dead. Without the creation of life, your so-called kingdom of the dead is nothing. Even though they were enemies before, Thrall felt very satisfied when he heard Duque ridicule Arthas, who had just shouted, "In the name of the Lich King, Nuzul, I grant you all eternity." At first, the tribe didn't understand how these living dead came to be, but when they heard the name of the Lich King, Orgrim and the others were very unhappy. Nuzul was the great chieftain of the third generation, but now he ran to the Burning Legion to become a Bullsh*T Lich King and continuously blaspheme the dead? After abandoning the power of the demons, the tribe had now begun to return to the original path of the shaman, which was to believe in their ancestors and the power of the elements. This practice of making the dead unable to rest in peace was undoubtedly the biggest taboo of the Beastmen. Duque humiliated Arthas by saying that the stray dog on the roadside had become a Death Knight, especially for a young man like Thrall. Although he didn't say it on the surface, he couldn't help but acknowledge Duque a little more. On the other side, when Arthas's face was distorted to the extreme, he was so angry that he actually laughed. Ha, ha. Interesting, this is really interesting. Duque tilted his head. A strange soul. I didn't expect to see such an interesting scene after becoming a Death Knight. The corner of Arthie's mouth curved up. I'm afraid no one would have thought that the legendary great hero Duque, who killed millions of beastmen and led the Alliance to victory in the Battle of the Dark Portal with unparalleled wisdom, would actually have such a vulgar soul. Ha! Even the beastmen next to you are much more noble than you. Arthies was referring to Orgrim and Thrall. In fact, what he said was also nonsense. If Orgrim wasn't noble, Lothar's Quell, the Zalem, wouldn't have collapsed at such a crucial time. Most people would be angry when they were scolded for having a dirty soul. After all, this was an era where the noble spirit of chivalry was prized. Unfortunately, Duque was a transmigrator. He retorted with his hands on his waist, hee. I'm a pervert and I'm not afraid of anyone. No matter how much I like money, fame, status, and beautiful women, no matter how vulgar my soul is, at least I use my wisdom and strength to protect humans and this world. No matter what, I'm more noble than a bastard like you who killed your father and destroyed your country. Arthies, stop struggling. Obediently dismantle your body and then go to hell to repent. Oomph. The once noble prince let out a cold snort. When Frostmourne enters your body and subdues your soul, I will be very interested in making you my assistant. Your wisdom can help His Majesty the Lich King better rule this world. Duque facepalmed. This child is hopeless. All right, for Kalia's sake. After I kill you, I will properly burn your body and let you rest in peace. Sister Kalia is still alive? Arthies' eyebrows jumped. After you killed your father, Kalia had to just announce that she was the queen of Lordaeron. Duque took a step forward. Unknowingly, his aura became shocking. Why did he have to argue with Arthies? It was very simple. Only Arthies, whose soul had fallen to the extreme, could truly unleash the power of Frostmourne. On the other hand, Arthies, who had a crack in his soul, would have his strength greatly reduced. First, he used the Horde to deplete the Scourge army, then with the Alliance army, and finally, Kalia was Duque's real trump card. Chapter 742. If possible, Duque didn't want to use such a despicable method. It was a tragedy that Arthas had fallen from a great prince to a Death Knight, but unfortunately, Duque, who had been blasted into the void, couldn't stop him in time. However, just because he made a mistake once didn't mean he could make a mistake again. Arthas was already dead, walking further and further down the path of evil. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before he became the second Lich King. If they didn't stop Arthies, then the tragedy of history would repeat itself. He thought about the eastern and western plague lands that occupied 1/3 of the Rotterdam continent in the future. That place was a vast and boundless land of despair that spanned thousands of miles. The earth was corroded, and the plants were withering and mutating. The ground was filled with terrifying undead creatures and infected mutated animals. Duque could still remember the deers that were covered in abscesses wailing in despair, and the squirrels that had turned into hideous monsters. Perhaps it could be said that the mastermind behind the spread of all this was the crazy Kel, Fizad, the Lich King Nizul who was tamed by Kill Jaden. However, without Arthas, the main culprit, carrying the flag, the Scourge army would not be able to do this. In the original history, after the destruction of the Rotterdam city, many resistance organizations emerged in the territory of the Rotterdam Kingdom. In addition to the Silver Hand Knights, which was disbanded by Arthas before he fell, and the most famous Scarlet Crusade and Silver Dawn, there were actually many other organizations. For example, the Northern Army of Lordaeron, which was later led by Marshal Garithus, and the Andorral Garrison Army, Darrowshire Garrison Army, Hearth Valley Garrison Army, and other local armies of Lordaeron. There were also various civil resistance organizations. These organizations had effectively restrained or hindered the advance of the Scourge. However, when King Dylan led his fleet to rescue the people of Lordaeron, he was shocked to discover that the entire land of Lordaeron was filled with undead. It was because most of the rebel groups had been destroyed. The Scarlet Crusade was being toyed with by the Dreadlord. The rebel armies were destroyed one after another. Arthes alone had killed his teacher, Uther, and one of the 5 silver sages, Gavin Rad, back in the original timeline. In total, there are the leader of Lordaeron's Scourge Resistance Organization, the Justice Guard, Marcus. Halak, the leader of the Circle of Holy Light, the Lordaeron Calamity Resistance Organization. The leader of the ultimate force of the Lordaeron Cataclysm Resistance Organization, Daglin. That was just within the borders of Lordaeron. Other than Lordaeron, Arthas, who was unstoppable by anyone, led the Calamity Army to sweep across the entire Lordaeron continent. Many important figures died under Frostmourne, S-Sword, Dalajan Kirin Tor Antonidas, Elf Ranger General Sylvanas, Sun King Anastrian. More than 10 million people had died directly or indirectly at Arthes's hands. Now that the apocalyptic drama of the Scourge army had begun, the avalanche effect had begun. The easiest way to prevent the greatest tragedy in the history of Azeroth was to kill Arthas. This was definitely not easy. Duque did not have the strength to destroy a planet in 1 move or the strength to destroy a universe in 2 moves. All he could do was gamble everything he had as a transmigrator. Feeling sorry for Kalia, Duque still put his cards on the table. Sure enough, for the first time, Arthes's face, which seemed as if she didn't care about anything, showed some emotion. No. You lied to me. Korea died 13 years ago. In order to escape the shame of her fiancé being Nethario, the Wing of Death, and in order not to be imprisoned in the palace and waste her youth, she begged me to let her fake her death. Duque spoke almost word by word. At the same time, he raised his hand, and a magic mirror appeared in Duque's hand. The interference of the canopy of undead made it impossible to send a magic message. This was not important. With the system elf, Duque could perfectly copy the communication image that Kalia had sent to all parts of Lordaeron before she teleported away. I am Kalia Menethil. I did not die 13 years ago. I regret to tell you a sad news. My brother, Arthas Menethil, has been persecuted by the Dreadlord and the evil Lich of the Cursed God. He has become a Death Knight and lost his humanity. He killed my father, His Majesty Tyrannus. In the name of the Menethil royal family, I, Kalia Menethil, officially inherit the throne of Lordaeron and become the queen. Kalia's tone had changed slightly, and her youthful appearance had been stripped away. Even though Kalia had changed quite a bit, Arthes was still able to recognize her elder sister immediately due to the connection between their bloodlines. Sister? His mouth twitched for a while. Arthas, the most terrifying man of this era, who had gone from the brightest to the darkest, suddenly cried like a child. The undead did not have tears. It was just a hollow, dry howl. In the next moment, just when everyone thought that Duque had taken care of such a terrifying enemy with just his mouth, frost suddenly fell from the sky. Frost in June was never a good thing. Suddenly, an incomparably huge will descended. It was hard to describe this feeling of terror. At that moment, it was as if there were thousands of lives, letting out the most desperate wails before they died at the same time. At that moment, it was as if there were billions of creatures being tortured by demons. Their skin was torn off, their flesh was peeled off, and their organs were dug out. They screamed as their bodies were burned by the flames. Finally, even their souls were thrown into purgatory to suffer for 10,000 years. Whether it was humans, orcs, or elves, every creature could not help but hold their breath. Their chests felt as if they were being crushed by a huge rock, and they could no longer expand their lungs. It was an oppressive feeling of despair. At this moment, everyone finally realized that there was a terrifying existence behind this Death Knight who was getting stronger and stronger. It was watching and directing everything. Duque. An old and evil voice echoed in everyone's mind, Duke Marcus. The voice was like thunder, causing everyone's brains to buzz. Nizul? How have you been recently? Duque was not affected at all. I forgot. After you were tortured to death by Kill, Jaden, you have become a toy that can only stay in ice. You have no body. As soon as these words came out, everyone was petrified. Duque is too powerful. We can't even breathe, and Duque still has the leisure to tease such a terrifying Lich King? How big is Duque's heart? Or how strong is Duque? How can he not have the slightest fear in the face of such an existence? Chapter 743. The Beastmen might not understand why their legendary shaman had become a Lich King. In fact, the humans did not understand either. Nagazul had been hiding in the frozen continent of Northrend for many years. Then, after a long period of preparation, he revealed the shocking news of Earthies killing his father and massacring an entire city. Everyone did not know, but that did not mean that Duque did not know. Moreover, as the person who had personally overturned Nizul in the magic mirror 10 years ago, Duque definitely had the right to speak more than anyone else in the alliance. Since there were too many things that could not be verified, Duke might as well use what he knew as a transmigrator to present the final version in front of everyone. The leader was angry. Oh no, it was the dirty demon king who was angry. Nizul was ridiculed and flew into a rage. A huge black gas in the air turned into a huge tornado, violently blasting towards Duque. However, Duque did not move, as if he was dumbfounded in place. He even made a gesture to stop Mograine from making a move. The black tornado fell, and then there was no then. Seeing the tornado suddenly disappear, both the leaders of the Alliance and the Horde were stunned. Instead, Duque chuckled and said, "Ha, ha, Nizul, you are really regressing. Oh, sorry, I forgot that you are already dead. If you can really kill me easily in Northrend, then I will not resist. I will just surrender. As long as I can withstand your mental attack, you cannot do anything to me at all." If Nizul still had lungs, they would definitely explode. In the end, you are just a soul being played by Kill Jaden, a mere pawn with experimental significance. So what if you use the Scourge to sweep the entire continent? So what if you do as Kill Jaden said and summon that descend to Azeroth? When that time comes, you will also lose your value. I don't need to say what happens to the poor guy abandoned by the Burning Legion, right? Ha! At this moment, Nizul was shocked. He was truly shocked. He did not understand how Duque knew about this task that Kill Jaden had personally given him. That's right. Using the undead to destroy the world was just a pretense to scare outsiders. As long as there were enough dragon aspects in this world, humans, a race with low combat power, would not be able to do anything to this world even if they all became immortals. Kill Jaden's real purpose was naturally for Nizul to find a way to open a portal and summon the other commander of the Burning Legion, Archimond, to the world of Azeroth. However, Duke revealed the deepest secret in his heart and his greatest fear. Nizul had always been worried about whether he would be abandoned by Kill Jaden after he was no longer of any value to Nizul. Tell me, how could Nizul not be terrified? How could he not be afraid? For a moment, Nizul almost wanted to become a traitor of the Burning Legion and jump from a traitor to a loyal subject. Alas, just as he had that thought, a pair of blazing eyes seemed to open at the end of the distant void, glancing in the direction of Azeroth. Nizul's loyalty to the Burning Legion was immediately maxed out. It seemed. He suddenly shouted in a stern voice, "Insignificant mortals! You don't know the greatness of the great commander, Sir Kill Jaden. You will die, you will definitely die." Duke laughed shamelessly. Then he raised his right index finger and waved it arrogantly. "Ha! Are you threatening me? Nizul, you are not qualified. I can kill you once, and I can kill you a second time. You." Nizul was about to go crazy because of Duque. Who knew what would happen next? "Don't say that you can't. I'm not even afraid of your boss's boss, Sargeras. Do you think I'm afraid of Kill Jaden?" Duque sneered. Even if they were not allies, even Sal couldn't help but want to laugh. On the Alliance's side, a large number of people showed admiration for Duque. Should it be said that Duque was indeed a legendary hero? If it were anyone else, it would be impossible to have such confidence. But Duque did. Nizul broke into Karazhan alone, and then he was turned into a dead dog by Duque. Nizul's death was definitely related to Duque. And Sargeras was beaten into the abyss, and Duque was definitely the culprit. What was confidence? This was confidence. Before any evil demon could really step on Duque, it was likely that Duque's undefeated legend would continue. That's right. Duque was arrogant, but Duque had the capital to be arrogant. Arthas, go, kill Duque. I want Duque's soul to be like me, sealed in a small space and suffer eternal torture. Dirty Demon King, you're showing your cowardice. Isn't this admitting that you're really a prisoner? However, Nazul's ultimate move was still very imposing. The dark aura that lingered on the entire battlefield was attracted at the same time. The black aura that was visible to the naked eye was converging, like 100 rivers flowing into the sea, from a thin line to a thick line, from a thick line to a huge pillar of air like a river, and finally compressed into a bright black light, shooting into Arthas' body. Soon, accompanied by a burst of bones, Arthas that no one had ever seen before, and that had never appeared in history, appeared in front of everyone. More than 2.5 meters tall, his muscles explosively expanded. Like the Hulk, Arthas became the focus of everyone's attention. The power of darkness occupied Arthas' body, recondensing into fierce and lifelike metal skeleton decorations. These decorations assembled into a larger armor that wrapped around Arthas' body. Arthas suddenly took a step forward, and even the earth rumbled. At the same time, a large amount of dark aura flowed out from the pores on his thighs, giving people a feeling of shame. Duque, you're dead. I will kill you first, and then take my sister to the eternal world of the dead. Arthas gritted his teeth, of course, as the price for angering me and insulting my master, Nazul. I will turn you into the dirtiest ghoul, and then all the women who love you will become the most abominable banshees. Duque once thought that there was nothing in this world that could anger him. How could the few curses that came and went in Azeroth compare to the profound and unfathomable curses of a nation? However, when the words ghoul and banshee jumped into his ears, Duque still felt an inexplicable anger. Damn you. I've been around for more than 10 years, and you want to go back to being a ghoul? And you want to kill my woman? *CK. Didn't anyone tell you that the more arrogant the boss, the more miserable it is? Second fool, hand over your invincible warhorse, and I promise not to touch your sister. Chapter 744. Before Duque transmigrated, how important was a rare mount in the eyes of a fanatical player? A living example illustrates all this very well. There was once an unlucky party leader called Light's Guide. Before defeating the final boss, Arthas, he said, even if I let you ride on my horses, I won't let you ride on my first, Invincible. Yes, that guy's girlfriend was also in the party at that time. Miraculously, she didn't fall out with him, and in the end, he even had a lover. Congratulations. Congratulations. I went too far. However, a powerful mount was very important in raising one's level of coolness. Duque was very unhappy that wizards didn't have their own mounts. If he really accidentally overturned Arthas in advance, Duque would definitely not mind using the BMW Invincible that grew up with Arthas since childhood and was turned into an undead warhorse by Arthas after its death to play with it. Of course, the others didn't know that Duque would have so many boring and dirty thoughts in the face of a great enemy. That wasn't important. Sometimes, a person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. With all of Duque's miraculous feats in the past, everyone thought that Duque had a card up his sleeve. Grom. Duque spoke in standard orc language. Grom Hellscream bared his fangs. A human, an enemy of the orcs, could speak orc language so fluently. Grom couldn't get used to it no matter what. I heard that the Hellscream family is the best at killing Gorons. What about this mini Goron? Duque curled his lips and sneered at Arthas. Goron? He's only an ogre. He's not qualified to be a Goron. Grom exhaled and raised his famous blood howl, striding forward. Wait! Thrall wanted to warn Grom, but found that Orgrim had stopped him. No matter how he thought about it, in this dangerous temporary alliance, the first to attack the enemy would be at a disadvantage. Thrall. Orgrim spoke in the ancient orc shaman language. Even though it wasn't fluent, Thrall could understand it, and Duque probably didn't. Duque may be a bastard, but he's a capable man. Didn't you notice that Duque was the first to make his move? He just spouted a bunch of nonsense. No, if you look closely, Arthas might seem very strong now, but in reality he's not even as strong as he was before. Sal's heroic rectangular face froze, and then he understood. That's right. In terms of pure strength alone, Arthas was extremely terrifying. He was already so terrifying that people wouldn't be able to stand steadily in front of him. However, Duque's words had clearly shaken Arthas' will and soul. Orgrim was right, Arthas was even more terrifying. Although Arthas wasn't as powerful as she was now, she still had the potential to grow infinitely. Why were the four of them able to hold on for so long in the face of a monster wielding a super demonic sword? Even if they didn't want to admit it, they had to admit that Arthas was using them as sparring partners. In the beginning, let alone the four Horde heroes, even a few Kiliarchs could hurt Arthas. However, this mysterious Death Knight only used the scarlet halo around his body and sacrificed the servants he summoned to continuously recover his injured body parts and his strength. Following that, Arthas went from being unable to withstand the siege of the four heroes like a sandbag in the beginning, to occasionally defending later, and now to being able to fight back. Arthas' combat skills were growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was like a sponge absorbing water, absorbing the opponent's combat skills to speed up his own growth. This made Thrall and the others even more frightened. Now, Arthas' strength had increased. Even if it gave people the feeling of looking up to a tall mountain, a mountain was just that big. If there were enough people, there was still hope of flattening the entire mountain. Sal didn't know why he could do this when he mentioned Kalia. In any case, Duke displayed an unconventional method that really opened the young Sal's eyes. The Horde's most valiant warrior, Grom Hellscream, was the first to rush forward. It was a beautiful jump slash as always. The crouch that shook the earth, the jump path that defied common sense, was still shocking no matter how many times one saw it. As the commander of an army, Mograine rarely fought Grom directly. However, every time he did, Mograine would guard against Grom trying to decapitate him. After all, Mograine had personally seen the crazy Grom cut down a dwarf steam tank with one jump slash. The power of this attack was definitely not small. Arthas raised his sword to block it. He did manage to block it, but the huge force from Bloodhowl was something even his strengthened muscles couldn't withstand. Arthas' massive body could clearly be seen sinking into the ground, and the soil beneath her feet immediately sank in. It couldn't be considered a success. Grom immediately used the rebound force to engage in a fierce battle with Arthas. Go, Mograine, the Bendis. There's no need to worry about the orcs. As long as we don't do anything sneaky, the orcs definitely won't attack us first. I even strongly recommend that you use Holy Flash on the orc heroes and give them blessings. Mograine and Abendis gritted their teeth and charged forward. Just as the two of them were charging, he raised his hand. When a light flashed across Grom's body, the Warsong chief was a little frightened for a moment. Duque's orc language floated over. Don't be afraid. This power is similar to your shaman's blessings. Power blessing, king's blessing, power amplification from the holy light was definitely a good thing for a violent warrior like Grom. A horizontal slash that was even faster than before caused Arthas to stumble. With a cold snort, Arthas swung her sword in reverse, creating a gust of cold wind. This was the Death Knight's icy touch. It was this frost plague with a cold aura that caused the four orc heroes a lot of trouble. Grom didn't expect that in the next moment, his body would shine with a golden light. It was Abendis' holy light that helped him dispel the cold. All right. Even if he didn't want to admit it, the human's holy light had indeed helped Grom a lot. At this moment, Rexer and Orgrim looked at each other and charged forward at the same time. In an instant, 5 burly men surrounded Arthas. The main attacker was still the orc hero, while the 2 human paladins mainly used the power of the retribution element and the power of the holy element as support. Chapter 745. It just so happened that Arthas's body had become huge. Otherwise, the attacks of the three orc heroes were so wide and wild that there would be no way for two more people to get in between him. Ah! For the first time, Arthas felt a faint sense of irritation. The main attackers were the three giant orcs. With the help of two powerful paladins, his damage methods were obviously restrained. Every time he used all his strength to repel an orc hero, the paladin next to him would immediately rush forward to replace him. Compared to the orc warriors, the human paladins had stronger defense and were more difficult to deal with. At this moment, Duque's third order came. Burn the nearby corpses. The prince did as he was told without even frowning. In fact, Duque had originally guessed that Kale, might not want to do it. After all, it was indeed a bit torturous to ask the dignified High Elven Prince to act as an incinerator to clean up the corpses. Who knew that the prince would do as he was told? Kale's extremely gorgeous Phoenix Flame was fully activated. Almost every time he raised his hand, spots of red light would splash out like water. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. He did not expect that the legendary Fire Feather, the ultimate skill of Kale, Private Phoenix, AO, could be seen here. At first glance, each flame feather was only the flame of a lighter, but when the flame feather quickly shot towards the corpses on the ground, each corpse was instantly set on fire. Some corpses that had already begun to turn into immortals suddenly jumped up, roaring and struggling frantically. In a very short period of time, the shortest was less than 3 seconds, the entire corpse seemed to have been sent into an incinerator. Under the flames that were thousands of degrees high, it was easily charred and carbonized. Skin, muscles, and bones were all deformed due to the high temperature. The entire process took no more than 10 seconds. Even the large orc corpse, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, quickly turned into ashes and disappeared in the turbid wind that passed through the battlefield. If Arthas had only felt annoyed earlier, he now truly felt a sense of crisis. Death Knights represented the pinnacle of evil force. Death Knights had quite a few melee skills. Apart from corpses, they were best at playing with plagues and dark powers. The corpses around him were cleared in an instant. For Arthas, not only did this mean that his corpse resurrection, corpse explosion, undead army, and other skills that required corpses could not be used. The key was that without the undead servants, there was no skill like Death Contract that could sacrifice a servant to recover his physical damage. This was equivalent to forcibly interrupting his perfect cycle of recovery. Of course, he could use Blood Aura to forcibly extract power from his opponent to heal his injuries. However, a Death Knight could use more than one type of spiritual energy. Forcefully limiting the type of spiritual energy he could use would undoubtedly make his ability to respond worse. Impossible! The Death Knight was a very mysterious profession to the entire continent. When the first batch of Death Knights led by Tyrone Gorefiend appeared, countless human warriors were killed before they could figure out what the hell the Death Knights were or what skills they used. The Dalajan mages spent a great deal of effort to barely determine the attack type of the Death Knight. This was a general information that was exchanged with more than 4 digits of casualties. When the Dark Portal opened for the second time, there were traces of Death Knights. However, after that, the Death Knights disappeared from the entire Eastern Kingdom once again. The research and information on the Death Knights once again came to a standstill. Who would have thought that when Arthas faced Duke, she would actually feel uneasy, as though all of her skills were exposed in broad daylight for others to observe and study. Don't underestimate me. Arthas ruthlessly used Blood Strike. Frostmourne turned into a dark red stream of light and slashed at Orgrim. The power was so great that it was beyond Orgrim's expectations. This was at least the terrifying power of 2 adult Gollans. Orgrim could not withstand it at all, and his huge body was directly sent flying. The rune greatsword's momentum did not decrease at all, and it continued to slash at Rexer. Rexer did not have a powerful weapon that could withstand the magic device, Frostmourne. As a last resort, he could only whistle and let his porcupine battle pet, Hover, take the hit. In his heart, he was already mentally prepared to sacrifice Hover. However, it was not that simple. The porcupine was instantly cut in half, and under Arthas' violent power, the momentum of the sword did not decrease. Instead, it increased, and it slashed at Rexer at an even faster speed. Not good. At this moment, even Sar, who was holding the line at the back, felt his hair stand on end. Seeing that Rexer was about to die, who would have thought that at the critical moment, Mograine would dash forward and use his greatsword to block Arthy's attack. Clang! Mograine's epic greatsword shattered. If not for the paladin's divine shield saving his life, perhaps the first sacrifice would have been made. Rexer spoke the broken common language that he had learned from the prison guards in the past, and with great difficulty he said, "Thank you." This was not the end. Arthys used his back to take a heavy slash from Grom, and suddenly raised his palm. It was one of the Death Knight's signature skills, Death's Grasp. No one would have thought that Arthys's target was actually Kale, who seemed to be extremely safe 80 yards away. Feeling the evil power quickly gathering around him, Kale, face turned green. He could clearly feel that the evil power was gathering into a huge claw. If he did not do anything, he would very likely be forcefully pulled in front of Arthys in the next second. It would be terrible for a mage to be closed in by a close combat professional. At first, he wanted to use Flash, but it did not work. He switched to Ice Barrier to save his life, but it still failed. Arthas' unparalleled evil power had completely expelled the ice, fire, and arcane elements from Kale, body in an instant. This was undoubtedly the suppression of a higher level of mysterious power against a lower level of power. The Elven Prince, who had no idea what Arthys had up his sleeves, was so shocked that the back of his mage robe was soaked in cold sweat. At this moment, Duque made his move. Kill, was shocked to find that an Elven Prince that looked exactly like him had appeared in front of him. In the blink of an eye, the replica Elven Prince was grabbed by the huge black hand, leaving behind the real one who was so scared that he almost peed his pants in a daze. Arthys did not understand what had happened. The Elven Prince that he had captured exploded. Bang! There was a loud explosion. Fool's head and face were covered in dust from the explosion. At this moment, everyone could see that what he had pulled over was a mage's living bomb. Duque patted the prince's shoulder, who was still in shock, and said seriously, "Explosions are art." Chapter 746. Duque's spell did not deal much damage, not even as much as a swing from Grom's axe. What a slap in the face! Arthas had plotted and finally found a chance to kill off one of the enemy mages. Not only was he stopped, he even pulled a bomb over? Even though he no longer cared about his appearance after becoming a Death Knight, he still lost face when his face was charred black. Arthas felt wronged. He immediately roared. It seemed like he only roared because his throat was itchy. Only Duque, with the special vision of the system elf, could see the faint green light. Damn, is this idiot releasing the plague? Dispel! Actually, even without Duque's order, the two holy knights were already doing it. The holy light chased away the hidden plague on the orc hero, but it could not get rid of the plague bacteria in the air. At this time, Duque made his move again. An ice tornado with a diameter of tens of meters rose up in an instant. The ice tornado itself did not have much lethality, but everyone could feel that the surrounding air had cleared up. There was no longer the thick stench of blood on the battlefield, as if one was swimming in blood plasma. There was also no longer the faint nauseating stench of plague dust that was spreading. All that was left in the air was the refreshing holy light aura that the two holy knights exuded. Now, even an idiot knew that Arthas's move had been countered by Duque once again. Orgrim wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said in the ancient shaman language, "Gael, watch carefully. Watch how Duque pushes his prey into the abyss step by step. This method of killing the prey with the least cost is something you must learn to become a qualified leader." Thrall's pupils shrank. That's right. It did not matter if the Horde would still fight against the Alliance after this battle. The only thing they could be sure of was that the Horde was no longer the large horde that seemed to have an endless supply of soldiers. The orcs were indeed a powerful and brave race, but they only had a little over 100,000 orcs. If they fought another 2 battles of this level, they would all be wiped out. He had to admit that Duque's fighting style was the most suitable for the beastmen to survive in. At this time, Sal had not cultivated the path of shamanism, and as a warrior, his martial arts were far from the peak. Therefore, although he was holding the line, he was actually working hard to learn the path of battle and the path of control. On the other side, after the Elven Prince began to use accurate magic to support the few vanguards, Arthas finally fell into a difficult situation. It was one thing for Duque to make a move from time to time, but there was also Antonidas by Duque's side. Even if this chairman Kirin Tor was old, a Breaking Dawn mage was still a Breaking Dawn mage. He represented the highest battle power in the mortal world, so how could he be ignored? For a moment, Arthas was extremely hesitant. She didn't know if she should play that card. Right at this moment, Duque said leisurely, "Have you locked onto it?" "Got it." Antonidas raised his white beard, exuding the aura of a Breaking Dawn wizard. "Then I'll have to trouble you, master." Duque bowed. "For the Alliance." As soon as he finished speaking, Antonidas used flash and crossed a distance of 200 meters, suddenly appearing in the middle of a large group of zombies and ghouls. If it were a mortal, it would be courting death. For a powerhouse of his level, this was the stage where he could use magic wantonly. An ordinary wizard's Frost Nova could only cover a distance of a few meters. Antonidas' Frost Nova, on the other hand, was like throwing a 10,000-ton boulder into a wide, calm lake. What it raised was an exaggerated ice storm wave that was at least 15 meters high. Within a radius of 100 meters, regardless of whether it was the weak zombies, skeleton soldiers, ghouls, or the stronger cave demons and gargoyles, or even the semi-spiritual banshees, they were all turned into solid ice sculptures by this ultimate move of Antonidas. Whoosh! An ice storm blew. In the violent cold wind, the Breaking Dawn mage's robes fluttered in the wind, making a loud sound. The ice sculptures a moment ago shattered into ice shards in the next moment and were blown away by the strong wind. Then, a huge winged creature that didn't exist in the first place was blasted out of thin air. It was a humanoid creature that was more than 5 meters tall, with a pair of huge purplish-blue bat wings. It was wearing a blue armor with silver edges. Seeing the curved goat horns on its head, a shocking name popped into everyone's mind: Dreadlord. In the Burning Legion's endless expansion, conquest, and destruction, many races had joined the Burning Legion, and the Dreadlord race was one of the best. These horned creatures were not any weaker than Eridar's elite warriors. After tens of thousands of years, they had completely integrated into the Burning Legion and played the role of high-ranking commanders in the entire Legion. This Dreadlord seemed to be surprised that he was blasted out. Then, with a sinister smile, he placed his left hand on his chest and gave Antonidas a noble greeting. "Greetings, human powerhouse. I am the Dreadlord Kesronitor. May I have the honor of hearing your name?" He was so polite that people could not help but associate this ugly Dreadlord with those nobles' butlers. Antonidas coldly snorted, "You will know my name before you die." After saying that, he waved his wand and a shocking wave of ice instantly swept towards the Dreadlord. In the next second, one human and one demon, the two of them began a chase. In the blink of an eye, no one knew where the two of them had gone. At this moment, Duque finally strode into the battlefield as if he was strolling in his own backyard. "So, Arthas, I'll give you one last chance. If you can still beg for reinforcements from your Lich King master, then hurry up. Otherwise, when I start, you won't have a chance anymore." That was absolute confidence. And absolute arrogance. Beside them, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were fighting fiercely. Every moment, every minute, every second, there were lives being lost, and then they were being devoured by the power of the canopy of undead. A moment ago, they were brothers. A moment later, they were enemies. It was clearly such a chaotic and disorderly battle situation. But when it came to Duque, it felt as if nothing in the world could escape Duque's calculations, and everything would fall into his hands. Sal tightly gripped the steel axe in his right hand, his left hand clenched into a fist. His surroundings were covered in frost, and in this cold atmosphere, Sal found himself sweating. It turned out that this was the Duke Marcus who single-handedly reversed the war by destroying 1 million beastmen and destroying 1 million beastmen. Chapter 747. Snowballing was a great skill to learn. Just like how the world's tycoons played with money before Duque traveled to this world, some things would develop on their own even if they didn't want to. Of course, Duque could choose not to fight Arthas here and go back to recruit soldiers. A month later, it wouldn't be a problem for him to summon an army of 300,000. But by then, Arthas might have already built up enough power to drag tens of millions of zombies all over the Lordaeron continent. Quantitative change could easily lead to qualitative change. When Arthas had more immortals, a lot of black technology that should have appeared in history would naturally be born. For example, the super monsters that were as tall as 3 people and made from dozens of corpses, the Abomination. The Abomination had thick legs and round arms. Its mountain-like body was even bigger than the dwarf's steam tank. And because it was a collection of multiple human corpses, its life that was constructed from negative energy was also a composite life form. If the lives of all the immortals on its body were not reduced to 0, it would be impossible to destroy this monster. Therefore, the Scourge Army's snowballing ability was much stronger than the Alliance and the Horde. Duque knew very well how disgusting the Scourge Army was. Whether it was a Lich or a Death Knight, as long as their souls weren't destroyed, they could be resurrected. But it didn't matter. As long as he killed Arthas once, he could plant the shadow of failure in the fool's heart. Just like what Duque did to Orgrim. In this way, every time Arthas fought against Duque, he would become less and less confident. Even if his strength kept increasing, he couldn't escape the curse of Duque is undefeatable. That was why Duque had to fight Arthas even though he didn't have enough people around him. Duque entered the arena with an invincible arrogance. Thrall took a deep breath. He wanted to open his eyes wide and see if the rumors were deceiving his ears, or if Duque was about to shine brightly and blinded his eyes. Duque didn't say he wanted to fight one-on-one, so the other vanguards naturally wouldn't back down. In fact, if Duque didn't enter the arena, their situation would only get worse. The one who had the deepest impression of this was Rexer. He lacked a powerful weapon, so it was almost impossible for him to deal any fatal damage to Arthas. The 2 paladins were about the same. Their epic tier weapons were nothing more than an itch to Arthas' Death Knight armor, which was formed by the power of darkness. Only Orgrim's Doomhammer and Grom's Bloodhowl could deal moderate damage to her. When the Dreadlord appeared, everyone was shocked. Originally, everyone thought that the weaker Duque would deal with the Dreadlord, while the more powerful Antonidas would deal with Arthas. Who knew they would be swapped? Duque had his own difficulties. Although Antonidas was strong, the problem was that he specialized in ice magic. Against a Death Knight that was proficient in the ice element, he wouldn't be able to gain an advantage. In a sense, even the Elven Prince was more useful than Antonidas against Arthas. Duque left Kael, that's behind. Alright, now that they had cut off the strongest Death Knight's external help, and also cut off his life and energy recovery cycle, did this mean that they could get rid of Arthas? Arthas, who had gathered incalculable power of darkness, was still at the peak of the unreachable cliff in everyone's eyes. To be honest, if Duque couldn't come up with an effective plan, even Orgrim wanted to retreat. No matter what, this cross-race, cross-faction alliance was still too fragile. At this moment, Duque made his move. The moment he made his move, Kael, was shocked. The High Elves thought of themselves as the ancestors of human magic. Even if they didn't say it out loud, they always thought that they were the ancestors of magic, and that their magic was the strongest. Even someone as strong as Antonidas was just walking the old path of the elves, reaching the end of the road in one go. It was obvious that Duque had taken a completely different path from the traditional magic field. He wasn't a native, and after seeing the prosperous world, he didn't have the concentration to focus on one thing. He couldn't be as proficient in arcane magic as Ronin, and he couldn't play with ice magic like Antonidas and Jaina. But Duque had something that all the mages in this world didn't have, the system elf. This meant that if Duque wanted to play something, to be able to do what others couldn't, it would all depend on this. Countless portals that looked like portals suddenly bloomed in the space around and above Duque. Anyone who wasn't a mage would think that these were real. Only Kale, that's immediately sensed the strange aura on these so-called portals. Portals that didn't have spatial fluctuations? In the next moment, countless figures stepped out of the portal, each of them holding a dazzling weapon in their hands. They suddenly appeared in the empty sky and land. Unsheathed swords, sturdy hammers, exquisite staffs, bright knives, every weapon had unique shiny decorations. Not only that, but they also constantly emitted magic fluctuations that couldn't be hidden. It was obvious that they weren't ordinary weapons. They could only be high-level weapons. It was very likely that most of them were epic weapons. But there was no need for that. They were all epic weapons. Massacre Sword, Titan's Blade, Warmonger. These people wielding all sorts of epic melee weapons seemed to be heroic spirits, but they were all fakes. More than 100 fake heroic spirits formed a huge circular defense line, killing all the Undying that attempted to rush within 100 meters of Arthas. At the same time, countless elven archers appeared in the sky. Although they all had different hairstyles and appearances, and outsiders could easily have facial blindness when they looked at the elves, Kale, that's felt dizzy when he saw them. Damn, where did so many Aurelia and Sasha come from? Duque, why did you create so many copies of your own women? The second batch that came out were also illusions that Duque made with the system elf. The people were illusions, and the weapons in his hands were naturally illusions as well, but they looked so real. Loangaru, Heartbreaker Bow, Heart Striker, Huhuran Thorn, Dragon's Breath Cannon. The moment they appeared, they immediately stood in the air and used the long-range weapons in their hands to attack Arthas. The third batch was the trump card. 1 Jaina, 2 Jainas, many Jainas. The illusion of Jaina, wearing robes of 7 different colors, red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple, all held staffs and bombarded Arthas with magic. No, second fool was going crazy. Chapter 748. Duque had never thought of himself as a good person, let alone a saint. There was no way he could reconcile with Arthas, who was already a dead man. Since he had already offended her to death, then might as well step on her a few more times? If this was the original history, Duque might have been worried about creating a bunch of Jainas and accidentally hurting the passerby Kale, that's Heart. After all, the historical Kai Z seemed to have had a bit of an affair with Jaina in the Dalajan. Now there was no such worry. Jaina was sold by her father to Karazhan when she was still a minor. She was a good girl with Duque until Karazhan was sent flying into the void. Jaina spent most of this year in Stormwind City, rebuilding the Stormwind City Royal Magic Academy under the name of Duque's fiancé. She had no chance to interact with Kai Z at all. According to Elugia, there was one time when Arthas did not give up and wanted to come to Stormwind City for a state visit. Jaina directly announced that she would return to Duque's territory in the East Elven Forest to train during that period of time. Whether it was to avoid suspicion or to really not care about Arthas, either way, she wanted Second Fool to give up. The once spoiled childhood sweetheart originally had the chance to be a KFC in heaven and a pig on earth, but just like that, Boss Del Lin broke them up. Coupled with the identity of Duke Marcus's fiancée, no one could say anything wrong. Second Fool was tragic just like that. It was said that before he fell, he had been a single dog. Second Fool did not have sex with so many maids in the palace and insisted on being a single dog. Duque would not take the blame for this. Anyway, when Duque's illusory Rainbow Jaina team appeared, the Beastmen were dumbfounded. Then, on the Alliance's side, the 3 generals showed subtle expressions. Kale, that's pretended not to see. Mograine and Abendis rolled their eyes. Then they looked at each other. They were actually worried. Even a blind man could feel that their queen's unexposed but incomparably clear feelings for Duque. The problem was, Jaina Proudmoore was Duque's fiancée. To put it bluntly, now that Duque had used his rumored fiancée and his two legitimate lovers as illusions to fool around with, the two bosses of the Scarlet Cross could do nothing about it. Naturally, Arthas was the one with the greatest reaction. If Duque had brought out a more mature version of Jaina, it might not have provoked Arthas so much. However, Duque had not seen Jaina for 10 years. Both he and the system elf could only simulate the lowly from back then. Well, actually, he could simulate up to 16 years old, but who was Duque? My honest and reliable husband, slapping faces and trampling on people, ruffian do if I want to provoke you, of course I'll use whatever works. So, what Dumbass saw was the pure and beautiful Jaina Proudmoore that had been buried deep in his heart for many years, the girl he dreamed of every night. Fireball, flame explosion, frost arrow. The sound of a slightly childish girl's voice was nothing special, but when it entered Arthas' ears, it became a demonic sound that tore his soul apart. It was not hypnosis, but it was better than hypnosis. It was even more shocking than Mind Blast. Because it had nothing to do with magic and was purely psychological warfare, Arthas found it difficult to resist. As the saying goes, Daoists have their hearts, saints have their holy will, and demons have their demonic thoughts. The purest fanatical faith had the most powerful holy light. On the contrary, only the ultimate depravity could cultivate the most perfect Lich King carrier. For Nazul, Arthas, who had fallen from a noble and pure paladin to a death knight, was his most ideal reincarnation tool. Whether it was him or Kel, Fizet, they were constantly tempting Arthas' soul to fall in the darkest direction. Originally, they were very successful. As long as Arthas became the strongest Death Knight who did not recognize anyone and only knew how to kill, Nazul could carry out his ultimate plot. Now, Arthas' state of mind had undoubtedly been completely broken by Duque. The Lich King used death, plague, and frost as his signature, and the most taboo was human nature. At this moment, Arthas' heart was filled with hatred and anger. If Arthas' goal was to become a high-grade demon in the Burning Legion, this was not bad. To develop into a Lich King, it was a bit of a fork. This reflected on Arthas' body at this moment. The dark power that he could contain did not increase, but instead decreased, and there were signs of his power going berserk. Arthas' arms suddenly swelled, and with a violent sweep, he swept away Orgrim who was in front of him. He suddenly stepped on the gravel and rushed forward 3 steps, each step actually covering 5 meters. In the eyes of others, this was already at the level of a triple jump. Die for me! Another thunderous roar, and Tat's grasp directly pulled Duque over. Ah! Someone screamed. Someone frowned. Someone was watching the show. Duque could even create illusions of others. How could he be caught so easily? Sigh. What a bad memory. Duque, who was 30 meters away, mocked in disdain. As expected, another living bomb. Boom! With an earth-shattering explosion, Arthas' entire body was blown away. This time, it was not a low-level one like the last time. This was a flame blast that Duque had held back for a long time, stacked with a total of 108 radiant moon wizards. The terrifying power of the fire element was compressed into the size of a fist, and he stuffed it into the flaming figure of the living bomb. After being pulled over by the dark power, all the compressed fire element was instantly released, and it suddenly burst forth with terrifying destructive power that was comparable to a bombardment from a heavy cannon. Orgrim and the other beastmen were dumbfounded. Thinking back to the battle at the Scorching Canyon 13 years ago, the cannon shells that were more than a meter in diameter could not even compare to this. The violent explosion produced a powerful shockwave, and it directly blew away all 5 melee heroes. One had to know that this was only the aftermath of the explosion. Arthas, who bore the brunt of the impact, was directly blown into the sky, and the gorgeous ice armor formed from the condensed power of darkness cracked inch by inch. Chance. Everyone could see that Arthas had finally revealed a flaw. And a fatal one at that. Without waiting for Arthas to lose control of his body and fall again, Rexer threw away the axe in his hand, and his hands formed a nest, making a posture to help his teammate jump. Grom did not hesitate, and directly stepped on Rexer's palm, and suddenly glared down. Ha! A green figure suddenly broke through the chaotic smoke, and directly charged into the clouds. When it reached the highest point, it nimbly somersaulted forward, and Hellscream tightly gripped the bloodhowl in his hand and ignited the anger that had accumulated in his body. Accompanied by a wild, sky-shaking roar, he swung out a red light that split the sky. Chapter 749. Among the many professions, the warrior's fury was the most unique type of energy. From a certain point of view, fury was like accumulating a mysterious version of adrenaline. The more fury one had, the more their attack speed, strength, and agility would be increased. The most direct manifestation of this was the ability to use all sorts of unimaginable skills that surpassed the limits of the human body. For example, with a leap slash, one could jump more than 10 meters in a single leap. For example, one could step on the air and charge towards an enemy that was floating more than 20 meters away. Of course, it was only for an instant. In the end, a warrior who could not fly would still fall to the ground. When all the fury was released in an instant, the warrior's destructive power would reach an unimaginable peak. If a normal warrior's fury limit was 100, then Hellscream, who had stepped into the realm of heroes, would have a fury limit of 10,000. In terms of quality, it was also far better than a normal warrior. Before Duque entered the battlefield, Arthas had always seen Grom as the biggest threat. Even though Orgrim's attack power wasn't low, Orgrim's offense and defense were more balanced. He didn't have Grom's terrifying destructive power. Now that Hellscream was coming at him with all his might, Arthas hurriedly summoned what little dark energy he had and tried to place Frostmourne between him and Grom. At that moment, the Rainbow Jaina abruptly abandoned the staff in her hand. Holding a court staff with complicated and gorgeous decorations, she pounced on Arthas, who was in mid-air and had nowhere to go. Then she swung the staff at Arthas. Bystanders might not be able to comprehend how a seemingly weak strike from a stick could stop Arthas's movements. Only the most knowledgeable High Elf Prince, Kale, knew what was going on. The staff represented the dignity of the royal family. When a member of the royal family made a huge mistake, they couldn't use a normal staff to punish them. They could only use a specialized staff. This represented the dignity of the royal family, and also represented Arthas's childhood trauma, because he had been severely beaten with a staff when he was young. Duque's lips curled into a cold smile. To a transmigrator, this was like the killing staff of ancient times. Any troublemaker would first have to be beaten 100 times to extinguish their arrogance. And using Jaina's image as a baton, oh, it was a beautiful picture. One by one, the cute lowless Jainas smashed them with their clubs with murderous looks. As expected, Arthas was implicated. Even though the attack wasn't that powerful, he still stopped. It wasn't until Grom's full-powered axe strike arrived in front of him that he reacted and continued to raise Frostmourne. The cold white light was mixed with the black light. It was not dazzling, but it had a kind of evil and demonic aura. As if to show the domineering power of death, the disgusting dark magic power kept rolling in the air. Grom's full-powered slash was still slower than Duque had expected. Duque could not help but frown. It couldn't be helped. This was the natural limitation of the axe. As a heavy weapon, the axe was naturally the most powerful. Unfortunately, its speed naturally couldn't match up to an arrow, nor could it be as agile as a one-handed sword. It didn't matter. Duque still had something up his sleeves. With a snap of his fingers, Mograine, who was already prepared, threw a hammer of wrath at Arthas according to the agreement. The small golden hammer suddenly exploded on Arthas' right wrist where she was holding Frostmourne. This wasn't an attack, but a pure blinding attack. The illusory hammer that was filled with holy light was the biggest distraction for the undead. Ugh! Arthas grunted, and her hand's movements were still a step slower. Ah! Accompanied by Grandpa Roar's earth-shattering roar, blood howl, the legendary axe that killed the Lord of the Abyss Manoroth in one hit in the previous world, displayed its unparalleled destructive power for the first time in front of the world. It was a piercing howl, an incomparably violent bloodlust, an aura that could split the heavens and earth. When the scarlet glow from Blood Roar finally collided with the huge black and white body of Arthas, a deafening explosion erupted on the entire battlefield. The Death Knight's inner armor, which could have been blasted by 10 siege alls for an entire day and night without a single crack, finally shattered under such a shocking attack. Ah! Grom gripped the handle of his axe tightly, and all the muscles in his body expanded explosively. The strongest Death Knight under the Lich King's command came crashing down like a meteor. Arthas let out an earth-shattering scream and crashed to the ground. It was as if the ground had been hit by the largest cannonball. For a moment, sand and pebbles flew everywhere, and everyone around subconsciously got into a defensive stance to block the flying pebbles that were even fiercer than machine gun fire. Except for one person, stomping on the solid ground, a stalwart figure charged forward with all his might. His momentum was like a raging wave, and his powerful steps were more solid than the hooves of a galloping bull. Almost instantly, Thrall, who was at the back, was subdued by Orgrim's domineering bravery. Thrall didn't have the right to participate in a battle of this level, but he did his best to open his eyes wide, wanting to see how this legendary former great chief fought. Arthas's momentum was greatly reduced, but it was not enough, because the aura of death had not completely dissipated. In order to seize the opportunity to land the killing blow, Orgrim ran with all his might, absolutely not willing to give up this opportunity to kill Arthas. Although he didn't understand why his third great chief, Nizul, went to the Burning Legion to become the Lich King, Orgrim was very clear that if he didn't take care of Arthas, such a terrifying scourge army would sooner or later harm the other tribes on planet Azeroth. There was no turning back. Only by killing Arthas first would he have a chance of survival for the tribe. On the other side, Arthas was very clear-headed. Unless the soul of an undead was damaged or received a soul shock, they would never experience any physical symptoms such as dizziness. Although he was in a difficult situation, Arthas could still control his body, but Orgrim's frontal assault made him feel a chill down his spine. Under the warrior's intercept skill, the distance of 100 meters was instantly reduced to 0. In the blink of an eye, the burning power of the Hammer of Destruction was displayed in front of him. Arthas was not afraid. As long as the incomparably precious magic sword's hilt was still in his hand, he would definitely have the confidence to turn the tables. Facing the burning aura, the only thing he could shout out was the true name of the magic sword. Frostmourne. Before Arthas could release the supreme magic power of Frostmourne, he suddenly found that a Duque had appeared in an instant, holding a highly concentrated magic ball that shone with 5 different colors, and instantly cut off his right arm. Chapter 750. 5 Elements. When Thrall first saw this legendary enemy of the Beastmen, he thought that Duque was just smart. But when he saw that Duque could control 5 elements at the same time and appear in a form that didn't conflict with each other, Thrall was shocked. Thrall had heard of high-level human mages who could use Frostfire Arrow, which was a mixture of ice and fire elements, but he had never heard of anyone who could combine 5 elements without conflict. Arcane, fire, ice, lightning, and storm. The 5 destructive elements were perfectly combined, and it seemed like they couldn't go too far away from his body. From beginning to end, the 5-colored magic ball never left Duque's palm. Duque had no choice but to fight in close combat. He pushed out his palm and bombarded Arthas's arm at close range. Nobody noticed that as soon as it came into contact with Arthas's arm guard, the glowing orb suddenly morphed into the shape of a sword within 1/100th of a second. Then, in the blink of an eye, it sliced through Arthas's arm guard, the muscles of her arm, and the bones of her arm that had been imbued with the power of darkness. The others only saw that Arthas's ice armor, which was many times harder than a tortoise shell, was destroyed by the 5-colored energy ball after Grum blasted it in the chest area. It wasn't that Arthas's defense wasn't high, but that there was nothing in the world that could truly achieve full elemental defense. Just like Frostfire Arrow, It aimed to break through the opponent's weakest resistance. Duque's spell, which he named Five-Colored Greatsword, was the same. To Duque's surprise, Arthas's weakest resistance was not fire, but everything didn't matter anymore, because Orgrim had already come up to finish off the attack. Oh, the hammer! Orgrim definitely wouldn't mind smashing Duque and Arthas into meat paste together. Of course, the premise was that the Duque who used the Five-Colored Greatsword to cut off Arthas's arm was the real deal. Just before the Hammer of Destruction landed, the Duque in front of Arthas disappeared. Orgrim noticed that when Duque appeared with the colorful ball in his hand, all the other doppelgangers of Duque had disappeared. The only remaining Duque was hiding behind a Bendis, who was holding a shield and a one-handed sword. Should I say as expected of Duke Marcus? No matter what, he was so shrewd that it was frightening. Arthas, who had lost his arm, naturally lost his last chance to retaliate. Without any hesitation, Orgrim's hammer descended from the sky with unparalleled might. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the earth shook violently. When the hammer landed on the undead knight's chest, the ground around the two of them bulged due to the huge impact. Everything within 100 meters was engulfed in flames. The power of Orgrim's attack was beyond the imagination of mortals. Thrall's vision was blinded and dazzled. He could not help but turn around and fall to the ground. Thrall calmly realized that Orgrim had succeeded in his attack. After a full 5 to 6 seconds, Thrall carefully opened his eyes and saw the tragic scene on the battlefield. Due to the full power of the Hammer of Destruction, the ground was instantly burned to ashes. Before, the elf prince only burned the corpses, but now, everything was burned. The grass, the short trees, the messy rocks, and even the small forest in the distance were blown away in an instant. Giant concentric circles appeared on the grassland with the two of them as the center. The sand had reached its melting point, and it gave off a horrible smell. The smell was very pungent, and there was even a glass-like molten substance around them. The chaotic flames disappeared, and everyone looked at the center again. Orgrim held the Hammer of Destruction in his left hand, and his right hand grabbed the undead knight's neck. Then, he lifted the undead knight's broken body up high. Arthas was in a terrible state. There was a huge burnt hole where his heart should be, and the scenery behind his chest could be seen. His armor had not completely shattered, and his remaining ribs were supporting his human form. The once noble and holy Lordaeron prince was about to end his sins in his first official battle after his fall. He closed his eyes and lowered his head. On his right was his broken arm, swaying in the wind. It should be over. Seeing this scene, almost everyone secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Haha, you can't play anymore, you filthy undead knight. Grom laughed as he walked over with his legendary axe, Bloodhowl. Chop off his head and give the body to a human holy knight. Humans are better at purifying undead than us. Orgrim ordered as he turned to look at Duque. Duque smiled and nodded. Originally, they wanted to personally chop off the head of Arthas, who killed his father and destroyed his kingdom. Since Duque had no objections, Mograine and Grom could only accept it. Fortunately, they could still purify Arthas's evil and stinky soul. Hearing the soul of a fallen holy knight like them wail in agony would definitely feel good. On the other side, Grom grinned as he raised his axe. His hard fangs seemed especially domineering at this moment. I'd be happy to. Halfway through his sentence, Grom suddenly realized that something was wrong. That was because Orgrim was asleep. Sleep in the middle of this noisy battlefield? Falling asleep before dealing the final blow to the enemy? What the hell? Sleep? Duque shuddered. He immediately realized what was going on and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Be careful of the Dreadlord." The Dreadlord was a highly intelligent monster that exuded powerful demonic energy. It was an unbelievably terrifying existence, the ruler of darkness and the mind. These cruel and evil creatures were the Burning Legion's most capable generals. Any Dreadlord was at least as powerful as a peak Radiant Moon Mage. As if to prove Duque's words, in the next second, everyone present was attacked by a fog that contained evil energy. It was a thick, purplish-black fog. When the scorched ground touched it, a sizzling sound could be heard. It was highly corrosive. Without the help of the holy knights, the Beastman heroes would probably die. Although the fog wasn't fatal, everyone was unavoidably disturbed. Fog of decay? Just as time seemed to freeze, a shocking change occurred that no one could have imagined. Arthas's severed arm actually floated into the air and pierced through the chest of the former great chieftain Orgrim. That was an unsurprising stab to the chest. The sharpness of a god-tier magic weapon wasn't something that a well-trained body could withstand. It was easy to imagine that Orgrim's heart would be split in half at this moment. Chapter 751. Duque said calmly, "You played a part in the birth of the Death Knights." Duque spoke again, "You want to go to the Kalimdor continent, right?" "No," Sar and Rexer screamed at the same time. Orgrim lifted the heavy hammer of destruction with difficulty and handed it to Sar. "This hammer of mine has accompanied me for my entire life. Now it's yours. From today onwards, you are the fourth chief of the Horde." After a while, Orgrim seemed to have affected his wounds and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then he said, "Are we still going to fight?" The Alliance soldiers lined up neatly and slowly retreated step by step, creating a clear dividing line in front of the chaotic horde. Sar hesitated, but Orgrim nodded. "That's right." Duque did not speak and let Orgrim laugh. The noise of battle in the distance became softer. It was obvious that the Alliance and the Horde had joined forces and the undead had lost their commander. Suddenly, a horn sounded from the main battlefield. Even though Duque knew that the Scourge army did not have a direct relationship with the Burning Legion's Dreadlord, Duque did not dare to take the risk. That was the same. He also threw a huge fireball the size of a carriage at the Dreadlord's head. Duque and Kale, that's flashed, trying to get past these annoying high-level undead. Even if they chased, they might not be able to catch up. With Kuel Salis still around, this was likely to be a serious diplomatic problem. Then, the atmosphere was a sad parting of life and death. Everyone saw a mocking smile on his face. On many battlefronts, after the undead were wiped out, both sides fell into an awkward standoff. Fortunately, whether it was the Horde's centurions, Kiliarchs, or the Alliance's lieutenants, they restrained their soldiers. They had no choice but to retreat. No one knew what the Scourge army had up their sleeves. "Yes." Sar gritted his teeth and nodded. "Ah." Grom immediately roared, slashing down with all his might with Bloodhowl that he had just raised. There was still the possibility of losing Kale. That's 18 undead knights and 18 liches arrived beside the Dreadlord in an instant. These high-level undead swarmed forward, blocking everyone's path of pursuit. If they wanted to continue the chase, they would have to abandon Kale, and let this noble prince block the two Dreadlords while Duque chased after them. Damn it. Duque raised his hand and conjured a bunch of Hand of Magic instantly casting spells that rained down like a downpour. Even if they caught up to him, they might not be able to defeat him. Orgrim squinted at Duque, who was standing 2 meters away from him, then glanced at the Alliance and the Horde. He opened his mouth weakly and spoke in the common language. "This is bad. I've been fighting with you for so many years. I've thought about it many times. Either I'll kill you, or I'll be killed by you. But I never thought that we would work together at the end of our lives, and then I'll be killed by that monster." Duque waved his hand without turning back. "Farewell, Orgrim." Sar supported Orgrim's body, but he could not stop the frosty blood from spurting out of the wound on Orgrim's chest. When Duque and Kai Z returned to the main battlefield, more than half of the 36 cannon fodder summoned by the Dreadlord were dead. These mid-level undead knights and liches were not a match for the heroes. Without much thought, Duque and Kai Z worked together to clear out the rest. Dark summoning. Sar still could not believe his eyes when he saw Duque leading his army away. Even when the Alliance's army retreated in an orderly manner under the sound of the horn, Orgrim could not believe his eyes. Duque was referring to 1 year at the Dark Portal. In order to make up for the lack of Horde warriors, Orgrim agreed to ghoul Dan's request to insert the corpses of human knights into the souls of horde warlocks to make them undead knights. The only fortunate thing was that Orgrim's soul wasn't sucked into Frostmourne with the help of 2 paladins. After all, Arthas didn't have the time to inject enough dark power into the Frostmourne. Usually, at a distance where they could see each other's fangs or eyes clearly, the 2 sides would have already started fighting. Today was a little special. The lieutenants immediately understood. All troops, retreat 30 meters. Duque shook his head. Maybe we will fight again in the future, but not now. But not now. We have a more terrifying common enemy, the Scourge army. Duque clenched his teeth. Retreat. One was red and the other was blue. The goat horns on the foreheads of the 2 dreadlords trembled, and they let out sinister chuckles at the same time. Orgrim pointed in the direction where Duque had left. See that Sar? That is the bearing of a legendary hero of the Alliance. Firm, far-sighted, and able to distinguish between priorities. You still have a lot to learn. But I believe in you. Your achievements in the future will definitely not be inferior to Duke Marcus. Kale, that's heaved a sigh of relief when Duque gave the order to retreat. At this moment, Sar's face was covered in tears as he nodded heavily again. Orgrim laughed, his laughter filled with desolation and unfulfilled wishes. Goodbye, my good opponent. Kale, that was not confident in facing an unknown opponent of this level. He had thought that Duque would chase him to the end, but he had never seen Duque be so rational. It was the dreadlord that Antonidas had chased away, a different dreadlord with a completely different color. Mograine had tried to use Holy Light to save this temporary teammate, but it was completely ineffective. If wounds caused by the demon god level, Frostmourne, could be healed so easily, it would not be Frostmourne. Orgrim probably wouldn't be able to survive. Go to the South Stream coast. I will allocate some ships for you. The quality won't be good, but it should be enough for you to reach the other side of the sea. The Alliance will not attack you along the way. But for those who have not joined the Alliance, you will have to think of a way yourself. With that, Duque left without looking back. Orgrim admitted frankly, that's right. Speaking of which, this is also my sin. The person who created the Death Knight died in the hands of the Death Knight. Irony. How ironic. Although they did not want to admit it, the leaders of the 3 tribes, including Sar, could only nod. This terrifying undead army was definitely the enemy of the living. Unfortunately, this powerful strike missed. A purple figure as fast as the wind grabbed Arthas and Frostmourne, which was still attached to the severed hand. The price of doing so was too high. On the other side, Orgrim was already in a dying state. Grom and Rexer stood behind the 2 chiefs, holding their weapons tightly. Even if the situation was unfavorable, as long as Orgrim spoke or the Alliance made any moves, they would not hesitate to fight. But they immediately realized that there were 2 dreadlords blocking in front of them. Chapter 752. When the Alliance and the Horde broke off contact and the Horde's army retreated to the west, the 80,000 Scarlet Cross soldiers set up camp next to the Dalajan. A large group of lieutenants and colonels surrounded the main tent. What are you doing? Are you trying to rebel? Mograine was a little angry. These were his soldiers. When they were almost attacked by the Scourge and the Horde, they were all obedient. Now they were rebelling against Duque? Wasn't this a slap to his face? No. Marshal Mograine, we just want to know an answer from Commander-in-Chief Marcus. Regardless of whether the answer is in line with our wishes, we are still the soldiers of Rotterdam and the Alliance. A brigadier general, who was obviously elected, saluted impeccably, then asked the question on everyone's mind, why did you let the Horde go? Duque's eyes were like lightning. He looked from left to right, then raised his chin slightly. Before I answer your question, let me ask you a question. Do I, Duke Marcus, look like a traitor of the Horde? Everyone was stunned, then looked a little embarrassed. If Duke, who had personally ended the 2 wars between the Alliance and the Horde, and had killed millions of beastmen and was crowned as the Alliance's great hero, was a spy for the beastmen, then the humans might as well jump into the sea and commit suicide. How is that possible? You are a great hero of the human race. Sir, please don't joke. We don't mean to reprimand you, but we can't sleep until we get an answer. That's right. Most of our homelands were burned by the orcs. Many of our elders died in the hands of the orcs. Suddenly telling us not to attack the rebellious orcs makes us feel uncomfortable. Mograine could completely understand how they felt. Former enemies and yesterday's slaves had suddenly become potential allies. No one could stand this. But what if they angered Duque and caused Duque to abandon Lordaeron in a fit of rage? Mograine and Abendis were both furious. Duque waved his hand to stop Mograine and Abendis, who were about to explode, and said with a smile, "So, what do you think we should do?" Someone shouted on the spot, "Destroy the Doomsday Army first, then hang those orcs who dared to kill the prison guards." Duque continued to ask, "Okay, next question. Do any of you know how many soldiers the Calamity Troop has?" 1 million? This was a conservative. Don't even mention a million. As long as we have a complete formation and FFF flamethrowers, we won't be afraid even if they come at us with 10 million. This was obviously an optimist. At this time, Duque's face suddenly turned cold as if by magic. His expression was frighteningly gloomy. Duque raised a finger. Not to mention that you only have 100 flamethrowers per 10,000 people. Even if you had 10,000 sets, it would be useless. Do you know how many soldiers the Doomsday Army has? 100 million. At least 100 million. As soon as Duque's words left his mouth, it was as if an icy gust of wind had suddenly swept through the entire place. All the colonels and lieutenants shivered at the same time, and then gasped in unison. It can't be? How is this possible? Duque raised his chin slightly. That's right. There are only slightly more than 10 million humans in the entire Eastern Kingdom. But don't forget, to create the Undead Clan, we don't need to make zombies out of living humans. To the Doomsday Army, the skeleton soldiers are also soldiers. Duque did not beat around the bush and directly gave the answer. When the colonels and lieutenants heard this, it was as if they had been struck by lightning. They all stood rooted to the ground and were speechless for a long time. Duque waved his hand and said loudly, "I know that it is hard for you to accept, but the Doomsday Army is such a bastard. They will dig out all of your ancestors from their resting places and turn them into soldiers who will slaughter the living. Therefore, what we are going to face is not just 1 or 2 million trash targets, but hundreds of millions of skeleton soldiers. If you don't want to be drowned by the sea of undead and become a part of purgatory, then go down and prepare for battle." The officers dispersed and hurriedly returned to their own platoons and squads to announce this terrifying fact to the soldiers. For a moment, the barracks was filled with screams and curses. Mograine was a little embarrassed. "Duque, thank you for your hard work. They have to think this through sooner or later. Otherwise, there will always be a thorn in their hearts." Abendis's facial muscles twitched. Will there really be 100 million skeleton soldiers? Duque raised his head and looked towards the north. That is an exaggeration. Arthas does not have that many liches and cursing disciples who can control the skeleton soldiers. 10 million undead clan soldiers is the limit. But there will definitely be 100 million undead clan soldiers, unless we... Duque did not continue. That, unless, was a very cruel thing to the people of Lordaeron, because it meant that the people in every town would have to dig out the skeletons of their ancestors and burn them. Even if the people of Lordaeron agreed to do this, it was almost impossible. The people of Lordaeron had lived on this land for 2,800 years. Before Arthas killed his father, Lordaeron had a population of about 6 million. It was impossible to calculate how many generations had passed in 2,800 years and how many people had died. Even if they wanted to burn them, they could not do it with their current manpower and resources. Back in the tent, Mograine asked anxiously, "What do we do now?" Duque gestured on the military map, constantly moving the chess pieces that represented the strength of the towns. "It is a good thing that we defeated Arthas' main force, but don't forget that the Scourge army is more powerful than the Locusts. We need to quickly contact all the towns of Lordaeron and gather all our forces. Those who should retreat, retreat, and those who should defend. We cannot let the Scourge army expand endlessly. Seeing the direction in which Duque was moving the chess pieces, Mograine and Abendis almost broke down. If someone else had done this, they would probably have cursed it out loud. This was because Duque had completely vacated Lordaeron and withdrawn all the troops in the Tirisful woodlands and Silverpine forest to the North Stream coast. In the east, he directly abandoned the holy city of Stratholme and withdrew all the troops to the Light's Hope Chapel and Tyr's Hand in the east. Nearly 2,000 kilometers of land in the east and west were all given to the Scourge army in one go. Mograine's eyelids twitched. We can't use the Soderer River as a line of defense, Duque interrupted him. If Caer Daren is not the nest of the Church of the Damned, the faces of the generals in the tent turned pale again. There were a few generals who wanted to argue, but Duque took out his trump card, Queen Kalia's staff. In the name of the commander of the Alliance and Queen Liamenethil, I demand that you carry out this order. Those who refuse will be punished as deserters. Chapter 753. It was difficult to leave one's homeland. This was an emotional bond that humans had in any era and world. The land gave birth to life, and the land gave birth to emotions. Duque understood the feelings of the soldiers of Lordaeron. Unfortunately, as a commander and a traveler who knew the course of history, he knew what he had to do. He could not stop the tragedy that had already happened. He could only let it spread and expand. That night he received some bad news. As expected, the Doomsday Army's attack was not limited to just one direction. The Church of the Damned had infiltrated Lordaeron very deeply. The latest report was that in the Tirisful woodland, more than 10 cities had been poisoned by the lords of the Church of the Damned. They either poisoned the wells or the granaries, causing tens of thousands of people to die and turn into zombies. Coupled with the Doomsday Army that had set off from Lordaeron, more than half of the Tirisful woodland had fallen. However, there was good news too. The emergency evacuation drill that Duque had stopped back then had played an unexpected role. Duque's butler, Makarov, had successfully used the water transportation of Lordaeron Mill Lake to save nearly 100,000 citizens. He had even used the fleet behind him as bait, luring Arthas into thinking that all the refugees had fled south to the Dalagen. In fact, most of the refugees had circled around Fenris Island in the middle of Lordaeron Mill Lake before heading west into the Silverpine forest. They had now arrived at the North Stream coast to await rescue. This could be explained by Antonidas's dark expression. The old man was certain that Duque's subordinates had tricked the Dalagen. Otherwise, Arthas's undead army would not have targeted the Dalagen first. The old man did not catch up with the Dreadlord. As soon as he returned, he announced that the Dalagen would focus on clearing out the undead in their territory. He did not even want to see Duque. However, at the very least, he promised to give 2 mages to Kael, that's to lead the Scarlet Cross Legion led by Duke. Including the Dalaran infantry regiment that was protecting the mages, Duke now had 100,000 soldiers in his hands. Duque was very displeased that Antonidas refused to see him. However, he could only helplessly accept this fact. In history, Antonidas also became more and more stubborn as he grew older. In his later years, he was just like Turinas, each of them worse than the other. Kael, that was quite excited about the opportunity to lead troops in a foreign country. Duque, this time, please give me some pointers. I will cooperate fully with you. Duque nodded and accepted Kai Z as his little brother. In the end, Duque chose to follow the Beastman's footsteps. However, his target wasn't the South Flow Coast, but the North Flow Coast. Firstly, there were more than 300,000 refugees gathered there, but there weren't many soldiers to protect them. Secondly, Duque did not dare to go to Stratholme through the Alterac Mountains. In the steep terrain of the Alterac Mountains, the most commonly used battle formations were useless. In such narrow and steep terrain, there was no need for an army of 10 million undead. 500,000 skeletons could jump down from the top of the mountain and carry the soldiers down the cliff. No matter how many elites the humans had, it was useless. Humans were not undead, and even the most elite soldiers would be tired. That night, Duque had to let the soldiers have a good rest. Throughout the night, Duque had to run to the South Sea city-state. The sky near the Dalajan had been shrouded by the canopy of undead, and communication had become very bad. Only in the South Sea city-state could Duque use magic to communicate with other countries. At the same time, Arthas was not having a good time. He found that his soul seemed to have fallen into a state of confusion. When he came back to his senses, he suddenly found that he had returned to the place where he had led the million undead army, the outskirts of Lordaeron. He finally recognized the guy who had saved his life. The Dreadlord, Tichondrius, looked almost identical to Mal Gannis. They were both sharp and vicious, but he also had nothing good to say about Arthas. Arthas subconsciously raised his broken right hand that was tightly holding Frostmourne with his left hand. "Yo, I'm not your enemy," Tichondrius said. Tichondrius said, twisting his lips into a smile that looked more like sarcasm. "But don't expect me to comfort you. Although you killed your biological father and handed the kingdom to the Scourge army, you passed the first test. The Lich King is initially satisfied with you. But you look at what you have done?" Arthas was silent. "You actually retained so many human emotions, causing you to be completely unable to use the power of Frostmourne. Too ugly." Arthas felt two completely different emotions attacking him at the same time, shame and anger. "Yes," he replied, trying to maintain a calm and powerful voice in front of the great demon. "I was wrong. I haven't completely forgotten the people and things I used to love. I feel regret for my failure, and I feel ashamed for losing to Duke Marcus." "Very good." The Dreadlord sneered. He was satisfied with Arthas's honesty. Next time, I will definitely kill Duque. I will imprison his soul in Frostmourne. I will let him suffer eternal torture. I will also kill Jaina and turn her into a banshee." But at this moment, another voice came from the depths of his heart, not from Frostmourne. "You're lying. You can't even harden your heart to kill Jaina." For some reason, he suddenly felt very envious and jealous of Duque, who completely owned Jaina even when he was missing. He knew that a real Death Knight should not have emotions. But he just could not control himself. He suppressed his emotions. Yes. The voice in his heart would eventually disappear. He could not bear the growth of the warmth when he thought of Jaina. If he let it develop, it would spread like gangrene and swallow him up. The Dreadlord pretended not to see the emotional struggle in his heart. Instead, he laughed and said, "There's no need to be so anxious. Perhaps Duke Marcus will become your right-hand man, as a lich. However, the Lich King can't bear to see your miserable state anymore. Now, I'll give you a chance to become stronger and bear more of Frostmourne's power." "Say it." "I'll do it," Arthas said without hesitation. "Right now, there's a group of uninvited guests trying to break into the throne hall that belongs to you and steal your father's remains. Go and destroy them. As long as you succeed, you will have greater power." With that, the Dreadlord touched Frostmourne. Arthas was shocked to find that the power from the demon sword was rapidly repairing his broken body. Chapter 754. Lordaeron, which used to be beautiful and holy, was now dead silent. Traces of the horrifying massacre from a few days ago were still all over the city. Half of the pure white tower had collapsed, the once magnificent streets were filled with rubble, and the walls were covered in scratches. Dark blood splattered on the walls and the streets, as well as a few smelly pieces of flesh. Most of the undead had been transferred to Dalajan a few days ago to participate in the war that attempted to destroy the city of mages. Only a few undead with incomplete bones crawled around the city in confusion. The sound of galloping could be heard, and a warhorse that was emitting a holy radiance stepped on a zombie that only had half of its body left. Even its intestines were hanging outside, giving this sorrowful undead its final rest. On the wide streets of Lordaeron, 8 knights were leading the way. In the middle, there were 4 large carriages and several guards. Another 8 knights followed closely behind. It was obvious that this was a funeral procession that did not fit in with the deathly silent city of terror, as the carriages were carrying funeral ornaments. It was a very grand decoration. Perhaps it was done in a hurry, and the ornaments did not match, but it was obvious that it was for a high official. Stop. This is the territory of the great king of the dead, Arthas Menethil. Ah. A low-level lich gathered over 100 skeleton soldiers and zombies, but they were instantly defeated by the charging paladins who were emitting a golden radiance. The fragile skeleton soldiers were directly smashed into meaningless pieces when they were touched by the heavy armored warhorses that were galloping at high speed. On the other hand, the lich was struck in the chest by the leading knight with a downward swing as though he was hitting a polo ball. The lich's magic was completely useless. His shadow arrow was directly nullified by the pure golden light of the leading paladin, and its soul was instantly evaporated. Without the obstruction of high-level undead, the team of paladins mysteriously killed their way in from the east gate. They broke through several squads of low-level lich troops and rushed straight into the collapsed palace. They arrived outside the empty throne room. The 12 paladins spread out on their warhorses and cleared the undead in the surroundings. 8 paladins wearing silver armor jumped down and lined up in 2 columns. They used their strong arms to carry a huge coffin. The dim light shone softly on the coffin, and one could clearly see the Menethil royal family emblem carved in gold on the coffin. They were the uninvited guests that Tichondria spoke of. Arthas suddenly understood why the Dreadlord was so excited. Standing at the door leading from the throne hall to the side hall, Arthas could clearly see that the leading holy knight's posture was different from the others. His golden wing pauldrons were also unique. Arthas's hands suddenly trembled, and she could only grip Frostmourne with greater strength. He suppressed all the hesitation and apprehension in his heart and ordered his subordinates to take action. Almost at the same time, the corpse that had been lying dead in the throne room moved. It wasn't the wobbling and unsteady movements of low-level undead. Instead, it was more like a fierce tiger bending down before it hunted its prey. A low-ranked lich stood outside every broken window, raising a staff that emitted an ominous light and pointing it at the holy knights. The cave demons burrowed out of the soil on the lawn of the palace, their sharp mouths trembling. The team that ventured into the throne room was almost entirely made up of outstanding holy knights, but there weren't many of them. Arthas's undead troops, who had been lying in ambush, easily surrounded them. The holy knights put down the coffin and pulled out their weapons, but they didn't attack immediately. Instead, they stood in a circle and glanced at the tall and white-haired man beside the coffin, waiting for his orders. Whether, it couldn't be anyone else. He looked expressionlessly at his former student who walked in from the side hall, but there were clearly more wrinkles on his face than Arthas remembered. Staring at Arthas, who stood in front of him, Wuther looked very calm, but his eyes were burning with the flames of justice. Wuther pointed to the rotting corpse that was lying limp on the throne with a big hole in its chest and said, "I'm here to give your father his final rest." Arthas raised his runic magic sword. As long as his soul is still in the sword, he can never rest in peace. Wuther's facial muscles twitched because of the pain, and his voice suddenly rose, like a whip tearing through the air. "You'd better get out of the way immediately. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't do anything to you during your father's funeral." It was Arthas's turn to twitch, and he replied in a rough voice, "Fate has made us so. By the way, I've already disbanded your knights. What right do you have to stand here?" "Ha!" Wuther laughed. Although his laughter was bitter, it was not faked. "Do you really think that you can disband the Silver Hand with just power? Why am I standing here? Because of my pledge of loyalty to Terina's Menethil, because I'm a holy knight." "Oh, I forgot, you're a holy knight too, I mean in the past." Holy knight. A once familiar word that had become extremely distant. Arthas did not forget it. His heart was tossing and turning in his chest, and for a moment he lowered his sword. But then he heard the whisper again, reminding him how much power he had now, emphasizing that the path of the holy light could not bring him what he desired. Arthas once again lately. Changing from a holy knight to a death knight is very dramatic, isn't it? Whether Although this process was enjoyable, I don't have time to reminisce. All of you must die. At this moment, Wuthers' face finally showed extreme anger. He stared at Arthas with a burning gaze that seemed to be able to destroy everything, and was extremely shocked. Holy light above, if you want to fight, I can fight for you. But can't you wait until we collect your father's remains? His kingdom has already been destroyed by you. Why do you have to blaspheme him again? You are the most despicable fallen person in the world. Father. Arthas turned around and glanced at his father's eyes, which were still open and had not started to rot. The eyes that had not died in peace seemed to still be staring at him. A tremor spread through Arthas's body. Blaspheme? Depraved? He murmured, more to himself than to answer. It seemed that this was another reason why the Dreadlord had laughed sinisterly when he announced the order. He knew very well who was coming. This was obviously another test from the Lich King. He wanted to see if Arthas could fight against his master, and if he could further blaspheme his father's remains. Arthas had enough. Tiris thrust high and shook his head. We fight now. Why? Wuthers' eyes widened in anger. For greater power. Chapter 755. You despicable degenerate. Uther's roar echoed in the broken throne room. Beside him, the battle between light and darkness had begun. The golden holy light of the holy knights. The dark evil light of the death knights. They were shining together. Every second, there were people falling. Or the human knight who had just shouted his holy name. Or perhaps it was the former royal guard who silently fell once more, the current death knight. Despicable? Degenerate? What does the world think have to do with me? I just want to feel good. I just want power. Amidst Arthas' wild laughter, Frostmourne began to scream evilly. Not only in his hands, but also in his mind, thirsting for battle. Arthas gripped the hilt of the sword tightly with both hands. His feet went into the T-stance that Uther had taught him. He raised his sword and got into an attacking stance. For an instant, Wuthers' gaze seemed to have traversed through time. He had arrived at the Arthas of 13 years ago, the little Prince Arthas who had worshipped him as a disciple and studied the path of battle and the path of holy light with unparalleled passion. Uther withdrew his gaze from his memories and looked at Arthas for a while. Finally, he slowly raised the blazing holy light warhammer. I was never willing to believe the news that you had degenerated into a death knight and killed your father. The holy knight leader's voice was hoarse, and there were actually tears in his eyes. Until I saw the destruction of Lord Darren with my own eyes, and saw the remains of his majesty. At this moment, Arthas felt his father's eyes focus on him from behind. He felt that Uther's words made his soul tremble. He hated this feeling of weakness. He purposely let the dark light on his body shine brighter. He turned his head and glanced at his father's corpse, the corner of his mouth rising. Do you believe it now? Unexpectedly, Uther started talking to himself. Your selfishness when you were young, I thought it was childishness. Your stubbornness and blindness, I thought it was the desire of a young man to walk out of the shadow of his father's generation. At the orphanage. At the mention of the orphanage, both master and disciple had the same sadness on their faces. Uther raised his head. Yes, the holy light forgave my heart, even though it was a true tragedy. After that day, I always prayed that you would realize your mistake. A mistake? I was making mistakes again and again, but why didn't you stop me at that time? After pushing the blame onto her master, Arthas continued to glare angrily at Uther. Wuthers' mouth was full of bitterness. I cannot be enemies with the son of my lord. Arthas forced a smile onto her face, and the two of them began to stare at each other. But you've done it now. This is my last promise to your father, my late friend. Even though I killed his own son when he was defenseless, the least I can do is make sure his remains are treated with respect. You and your people will die because of your promise. Arthas looked mockingly at the holy knights who were dwindling. Holy knights were very strong, but in the face of endless enemies, this strength, this holy light, was as weak as a firefly in the night. Perhaps. Before coming here, we were all mentally prepared for this. Wother did not care. I would rather die for my oath than live under your mercy. I am so glad that Terenas is dead. I am so glad that he doesn't have to see what you have become. These words made Arthas' heart ache. He did not expect this kind of reaction. The prince was stunned, and his heart was in a fierce battle. And Wother, who already had the advantage, took advantage of the moment of hesitation to strike first. For the holy light. Wother roared, swinging his warhammer slightly backwards, and then swung it at Arthas with all his strength. The blazing giant warhammer came at such a fast speed, and the howling of the wind made people feel like the warhammer of holy light had already torn through space. It was a hammer strike that resembled the descent of the scorching sun. There was no time to dodge, and Arthas had to grit his teeth and raise his sword to block. Clang, there was a loud sound. The huge impact almost made Arthas collapse. Arthas was at a great disadvantage. Almost at the moment when the sword and hammer clashed, Arthas felt the strength in his arms and abdomen weaken. The body that was reborn with the power of darkness was still not comparable to the body that had accompanied him for more than 20 years. The aftereffects of losing his arm and abdomen in the battle with Duque finally showed itself. Because Frostmourne had expended a huge amount of magic power to heal him, coupled with the instability of Arthas' Heart of Darkness, the direct result was that the dignified magic sword, Frostmourne, was actually smashed by the most powerful paladin Uther's epic-grade mortal iron sledgehammer, leaving a small crack. No, Arthas showed a panicked expression. Destroy Arthas. Wother let out a thunderous roar, and his beard fluttered in the wind, making him look like a god that had descended to the mortal world. Arthas did not dare to take the second blow no matter what. The nimble footwork that he had trained for a long time saved him. Even though he was almost hit, he barely dodged. The undead king could feel the air flow from the warhammer hitting his face. Wother's expression was calm and focused, and there was a murderous aura. At this moment, he only had one thought: to destroy the king's unfilial son. Stopping the spread of evil was his duty. At the same time, Arthas also knew that there was no turning back. He was no longer a living person. After crossing the taboo of life and death, he could only walk further and further down the path of depravity. Even without the Dreadlord's reminder, he knew that killing his former mentor was his duty. He had to erase his past, all of it. Otherwise, it would never stop raising its head, bringing him false sweet hope, as if there was still a possibility that he could receive mercy and forgiveness. Wother continued to attack, and after a total of 12 blows, Arthas retreated a total of 24 steps, all the way to the edge of the throne. Suddenly, Arthas found that his back foot was pressed against the edge of the Lordaeron throne. There was no way back. He had to fight back. It was a roar of despair. Arthas took advantage of the opening that Wother revealed due to his anger and slashed down. Who knew that it was a flaw that Wother deliberately revealed? Frostmourne missed its target. Stupid disciple! Have you forgotten what it means to lure the enemy? His left hand grabbed Arthas' wrist, while his right hand held the holy light warhammer above Arthas' head. As long as Uther was willing, as long as Wother was willing, this future Lich King would fall here forever. The soul that was destroyed by the holy light would no longer have the ability to inherit the Lich King's will and inheritance. At this moment, Arthas smiled evilly. Behind him, the corpse of Terenas, who had died a long time ago, suddenly pounced towards Wother. Looking at the rotting face of Terenas, there was still a familiar outline. As long as he used the holy light, he could destroy the zombified Terenas and get out of this predicament. However, Wother was stunned for a moment. When Wother reacted, he was shocked to find that he was already hugging Terenas' corpse, and that evil magic sword had pierced through his body and his lord. "This is my victory, Arthas. My teacher." That was a sentence that plunged Wother into an abyss of darkness. Chapter 756. Uther the Lightbringer. Unlike his father, who was indifferent to his family, demanding everything from his son, and who had been on the throne for decades, in Arthas' heart, he was a perfect elder. Arthas could have a lot of dissatisfaction with his father, King Tyrrhenus. For example, he almost sold his sister Kalia for the land of Alterac. For example, he firmly held on to power and stubbornly refused all new things. For example, but for Uther, the only regret he had was that Uther did not support him during the orphanage incident. He could find 10,000 reasons to kill his father, but not one reason to kill Uther. He was honest, he was brave, he was universal, he was pious, and he taught Arthas everything he knew. Arthas had thought that after falling, he could easily raise his sword against Uther. However, when Frostmourne pierced through his father's ruined remains, pierced through Uther's armor, and stabbed the demonic sword into Uther's chest, Arthas realized that he could not accept the fact that he had killed Uther. Suddenly he cried. The undead had no tears. What squeezed out of his dry tear ducts was the power of darkness, as black as ink. The evil black power condensed into liquid and flowed on Arthas' chiseled face. Arthas knew that his face was scary. He also knew that he would be mocked by the Dreadlord later. He just could not help it. However, the initial pain only lasted for a short moment. What followed was the increase in power. A deeper fall, a stronger evil. Frostmourne was cheering. The evil from the entire city of death was resonating with this demonic sword, gathering power on Arthas. The purer and more powerful power of darkness made every molecule in his soul rejoice in joy. Arthas kicked Uther, who had lost his strength and was starting to fall, and raised Frostmourne high up in the air as she screamed. Ha ha, ha. Is this the sweetness of power? Ha. Is this the power that is enough to defeat Duke Marcus and sweep away everything in the world? The strong contrast made the pleasure in Arthas' heart more and more obvious and more intense. It was the thrill of turning into thousands of bubbles that could melt one's brain and soul. At this moment, the fallen prince suddenly heard a sneer. That was Uther. He puttled. Arthas lowered his head in astonishment. He expected to see anger, fear, panic, or even regret in the dying Uther's eyes. Who knew that all he saw was pity? That's right. It was a pity that would only be shown to the weak. This feeling completely destroyed Arthas' good mood. He smiled. What? Is that so? Arthas didn't even need to look to know that her expression was going to be hideous. Looks like I won't be able to complete your salvation. But you said you can defeat Duke. I can't help but want to laugh. Blood began to gush out the moment the fallen prince pulled out the demonic sword. Wuthor was weakening at a speed visible to the naked eye. But why? Arthas angrily grabbed the top of Wuthor's breastplate and dragged him up. There are many who are stronger than Duque, but none of them can defeat him. Orgrim can't, Zul can't, Sargeras can't, and you can't. Bush, ha, ha. I am the strongest. Bastard, don't die so soon. Arthas was shocked to find that Wuthor had already breathed his last while laughing. Feeling that Frostmourne had imprisoned Wuthor's soul, Arthas decided to turn Wuthor into a death knight. Corrode. My master. In the eyes of the fallen prince, this should have been a very easy thing to do. Soon, Arthas' face showed shock again. Among the tens of thousands of souls that had been forcefully crushed by the demon sword, Arthas easily found the soul that only belonged to Wuthor, shining with golden light. However, no matter how he drove the demonic sword to corrode and drown Wuthor's soul, pouring in the wailing and fear of 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, Wuthor's holy soul still stubbornly refused him and the power of Frostmourne, resisting his and the Lich King's terrifying will. No, the prince screamed. He angrily killed all the living paladins in the palace, and then turned them all into death knights with thousands of times more magic power. These paladins had a strong holy faith when they were alive, but in the end, their souls were still contaminated. He was very sure that the power of the demonic sword had not weakened. But, no matter what he did, he could not make Wuthor's soul yield. The holy light had dissipated from Wuthor's body, which had begun to turn cold. Of course, Arthas could turn Wuthor's body into the dirtiest zombies or skeleton soldiers. But that was meaningless. A body without a soul could only become the lowest level of the undead. This could only prove that he still lost. Lost to Wuther's stubbornness. Lost to Wuther's will. Lost to Wuther's persistence. This strong sense of defeat accumulated in Arthes's chest. It made him feel like he was going crazy. For a moment, Arthes almost wanted to dismember Wuther's body to vent his anger. In the end, Arthes looked up to the sky and roared unwillingly. Summoning a disciple of the Church of the Damned, Arthes ordered, "Throw Wuther's body out. Throw it far away from Lordaeron City." This disciple carried out Arthes's order perfectly. When he returned to Caer Darrow's Scholomance Academy, he threw Wuther's body to the side of the road. After that, it was the famous tomb of Wuther, but at this moment, Arthes was venting the anger in his heart, until the two dreadlords stepped into the throne room with a sinister smile. Although the result is not very good for you, you have completed the Lich King's task well. Very good. Tichondrius laughed. His laughter made Arthes feel disgusted. When are we going to attack the Dalagen again? Stand up where you fall. Arthes believed in this iron rule. The Dalagen? The Dalagen is no longer a problem. Accompanied by Tichondrius' laughter, the Dreadlord's wings flapped continuously, adding a huge shadow to the room. Chapter 757. Almost at the same time, less than 50 kilometers away from the North Stream coast, a huge fleet was moving from west to east towards the North Stream harbor. The largest ship in the core of this mixed fleet was not the flagship, but the flag hanging on the largest ship was also very interesting. There were 3 flags in total. First of all, the flag representing nationality at the highest point was the blue lion flag of Stormwind with a golden edge. Then the flag representing the organization in the middle was the Stormwind flag of the Marcus Chamber of Commerce. Both of these were fine. What was interesting was the last flag representing an individual, that was the royal flag of Cultivation. This meant that the ship was a member of the Cultivation royal family. Generally speaking, according to international practice, a married princess was not allowed to continue to fly the royal flag of her family. There was only one reason for this strange phenomenon. Sitting on the ship was Princess Jaina Proudmoore, the fiancée of the Grand Duke of Stormwind, Duke Marcus. According to the previous agreement between the leaders of the two countries, Lin and Lang, Jaina was already a member of the Duque family in life and a member of the Duque family in death. She no longer belonged to Cultivation. Therefore, Jaina's nationality was Stormwind. This was mainly because Lin wanted Jaina to get out of here as soon as possible. Therefore, before Duque came back to complete the marriage, he kicked Jaina out first. In fact, in the 10 years since Duque disappeared, Cultivations's military and merchant circles were really on guard against Jaina. Of course, Jaina was not Kalia. Or rather, with her outstanding talent and incomparable intelligence, she was not a woman who was willing to be ordinary from the beginning. On Jaina's 18th birthday, she did not use a copper coin from the Duque family and began to build a fleet under the framework of the Marcus Chamber of Commerce. Today, the huge fleet of 50 ships, including 5 battleships, was the result of her efforts. This was not an easy task. In the process of her rise, she did not receive any preferential treatment, whether it was from Cultivation, Stormwind, or the Marcus family, which in theory would be her backing. Even the schedule of the shipbuilding had to be arranged through her connections. She did not understand why Marcus's direct descendants would reject her so much. At first, Gianna thought that Miss Alucia Berev, who was probably her fiancé's secret lover, was trying to steal power from the Marcus family. Soon she found out that she was wrong. Marcus family structure was completely different from any other family or organization on the continent. It had an organizational structure that transcended this era. Even though Duque had disappeared, everyone in charge was still resolutely carrying out their duties. Alucia was in charge of the business side. She used her excellent economic acumen and her equally excellent father to provide the entire Marcus family with an astonishing wealth that rivaled the income of the entire Lordaeron treasury. Reginald Windsor firmly controlled the family's huge private army, giving them the strictest training and regular combat training with monsters as their opponents. On the surface, the Marcus family only had 30,000 soldiers. In fact, every single one of them who had returned to their hometown to serve as a militia in the past 10 years had strength not inferior to the elite soldiers of the Scarlet Cross Corps. As long as the Marcus family was willing, they could pull out 100,000 elites at any time. Edwin Van Cleef was a bit special. He came from the Mason Brotherhood and was in charge of construction and intelligence agencies at the same time. In the end, what tricks he left behind when building the castles, how much power he had in the dark, except for him, no one knew. Cassar Ulysses was in charge of the family's knights. This was a huge group of more than 1,000 people, including 300 holy knights. They were also in charge of protecting Gianna. Unfortunately, Gianna knew very well that they would not hesitate to carry out their duties, but never had the slightest bit of loyalty to her. Sylvanus and Lilith, the two sisters, were in charge of a mountain group of 5,000 people, a mix of elves and humans. The family's chief butler, Makarov, was unswervingly carrying out the policy left by Duque before he disappeared. He did many things that others could not understand. For example, tinkering with new technology that even the wisest dwarves and gnomes could not understand. Another example was storing up a lot of things for the family that even Antonidas, a master mage and alchemist, could not understand. Every year on the 31st of December, these important ministers of the family would gather together and report their work. Most of the time, there was no specific content, and the report was only about the degree of completion, such as 94%, or 122%. Makarov took out the schedule left behind by Duque and gave out grades and rewards for each person's work. All rewards or punishments were based on a book of rewards and punishments that would be moderately increased and reduced every year. It was even accurate enough to calculate what coefficients should be used for natural disasters such as droughts and floods. The annual gathering was not hidden from Gianna, but everyone just treated Gianna as an insignificant bystander. At first, Gianna tried to see if she could control this incomparably powerful family as a fiancée, but she soon gave up in despair. The entire family was a huge and sophisticated machine. Unless she had wisdom and foresight above Duque's, no one would obey her, an outsider who had not yet officially changed her surname to Marcus. Gianna really wanted to cry but had no tears. She was tied to the Marcus family, but she could not get any substantial benefits as a mother. Of course, it was not that there were no benefits. For example, the 100,000 gold coins given to the fiancé every year, and the annual increase was 10%. Another example was the large number of magic books that Duque allowed Gianna to move to the Royal Magic Academy in Stormwind City before the battle with Nazul. Unfortunately, compared to the amazing treasure house of the Marcus family, these things were just pebbles on the roadside. The most terrible thing was that the plan that Duque set for this had a 20-year time limit. Unless it was confirmed that Duque was really dead, no changes were allowed within 20 years. Even if changes were to be made, it must be unanimously agreed by all the important ministers of the family. In order to meet the money needed for her magic experiments, in order to prove her ability, the bitter Gianna could only come out to do business. However, in the year she turned 20, Gianna's luck finally turned for the better. Her luck was the High Elves consultant cum butler standing beside her now. She claimed to be Magna Evans, but in fact, she had an even more amazing name, Magna Aegwin. Yes, she was Mediva's mother, the previous guardian, Aegwin. Duque is back, what should I do? Gianna asked Magna in a low voice. Actually, you can learn from me. If the Marcus family wants an heir, just help Duque give birth. I did the same to Naras back then, it's not like I'm the one raising him. Gianna almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 758. Mag continued, Back then, you were the one who killed me. The old bastards of the Tirisful Council forced me to abdicate every day. Today, they were afraid that I would suddenly die, and tomorrow, they were afraid that I would fall and join the Burning Legion. Alas, how could that be possible? Even if my brain was damaged, I would not let a demon sleep with me. I don't have such a heavy taste. Jaina was speechless. Actually, I think that Duque is already very good. He has this level at such a young age, and he has a good brain. Alas, back then, I had no choice but to choose the slightly more handsome Nyelas Aaron. If it was 10 years ago when the Tirisful Council was still around and forced me, maybe I would have borrowed your Duque's seed. Jaina's face was full of embarrassment. I'm asking you how to define my relationship with Duque. Define? The Marcus family is so rich. Since they want an heir, you can give them one. Later on, you can extort as much as you can from them. Then you will have money, manpower, and resources to do what you want. Jaina had never been a woman who was willing to be ordinary. If she could obtain the support of the world's richest Marcus family, then it would definitely be of great help to her dream of creating a career on her own. But on the other hand, she did not want to rely on the Marcus family for everything. However, Duque had unparalleled influence in the entire alliance. Jaina was extremely conflicted. I don't think Duque loves me. Oh, you're afraid of the latest news that Duque controls the Scarlet Cross under the name of Kalia, right? Jaina did not comment, which was a tacit agreement. Duque suddenly returned, and then in less than a day after the news of Arthas' patricide spread, he immediately made Kalia Menethil the queen. At the same time, he quickly incorporated the Scarlet Cross and used the tribe near the Dalajan to destroy Arthas' army of 1,000,000 undead. This news really shocked Jaina to the point of dizziness. Duque's gorgeous command and the super big move of using the tribe to kill 1,000,000 undead army definitely proved that he was the real person. On the other hand, Jaina felt very uneasy. Duque had never acknowledged his engagement with her. Even when Wang Lin reached an agreement with her father back then, he said that he would first agree on behalf of Duque, but the specifics still depended on Duque himself. What if Duque came back and refused to admit it? What would she do then? Duque had quietly hidden Kalia for 13 years. Obviously, the important members of the Marcus family were aware of this. She and Gianna were the only ones who were blindfolded. Who knew if Duque was having an affair with Kalia? 13 years. Perhaps the child would already be 12 years old. No matter what, the Rotterdam Kingdom would definitely fully support Kalia's marriage to Duque. What about her, Jaina, his so-called fiancée? Gianna's mind was in a whirl. At this moment, Magna was truly a god. She said in a frivolous tone, "It's very simple, seduce him." Seduction? Jaina's crystal-like eyes suddenly became lifeless. Men are all the same. Anyway, you have so much money. Magna naughtily glanced at Jaina's already very perky female mage breasts. Give me some props, and I guarantee that Duque will come running over to be your subject. With that, Magna turned around elegantly. She displayed a set of things that would blind Jaina's dog eyes in her current high elf form. That's right. Under the translucent white chiffon gown was a set of pink, incomparably bold and decisive clothes. That's how I took care of Naras back then. Jaina held her forehead, speechless. I must have been blind to discuss this with Magna. Of course, Magna could be described as a tough woman without any explanation. But Jaina's situation was absolutely different from Magna Aegwyn's back then. Back then, Magna was forced into a corner and had to step down from her position as guardian. Magna had the mentality that it was better to let her own son have it than to let Tom, Dick, or Harry have it. Now she was being asked to seduce Duque like a shameless prostitute? This wasn't just making things difficult for him. If he really succeeded, Jaina might actually consider it. What he was most afraid of was that after courting death, he still failed. That would be terrible. As expected, Magna was a good magic teacher and a good housekeeper, but definitely not a good life counselor. Jaina didn't say anything. She raised her hand, and a mysterious ice elemental magic ball floated less than 3 centimeters above her palm. It rolled quietly, demonstrating the mysteries of the elements. Forget it. We'll talk about that later. Now, Arthas's scourge had destroyed Lordaeron. It would soon affect the entire Rotterdam and even the entire northern continent. Let's prioritize business first. Yes, that's right. Duque isn't going to like a woman who doesn't know her place and is making a scene at a time like this. Mag also became serious. Jaina sighed, but Arthas becoming a Death Knight has fulfilled Medivh's prophecy. Speaking of Medivh, it was another amazing story. The arrogant Aegwynn had resurrected her son. Not the undead like the Scourge, but a true resurrection. This made the various kings feel unbearable, and they were extremely suspicious of Medivh. The two guardians, who were once extremely powerful, had now lost their earth-shattering power that was enough to destroy half of the world. Aegwynn was around the Radiant Moon standard now. After Jaina discovered her living in seclusion, she became Jaina's counselor. As for Medivh, after fulfilling his last warning duty, he truly went into seclusion to live out the rest of his life. Jaina was undoubtedly the one who believed in the prophecy the most. How could she not believe it when she was nagged by a powerhouse who had lived for almost 1,000 years? If the entire Eastern Kingdom really shows signs of destruction, what will you do? Mag asked. Jaina was silent for a long time before saying, I will first take a look at Duque. After all, Duque was the hero of the 2 battles at the Dark Portal. If there's anyone who can save the continent from such a terrifying scourge, it will definitely be Duque. If Duque can't do it, I will try to convince as many people to follow me across the endless sea to the Kalimdor continent on the other side of the sea to seek a new life. Have you found the place? Jaina's gaze seemed to transcend space, passing through the turbulent endless sea to reach the shore. I found it. It's called Theramore. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.